Okay, good morning. Bonjour. If we're ready from a technical point, Mr. Clerk, we'll proceed. Want to welcome everybody to the LRT subcommittee. You'll note that we are enjoying a very large room today. The intent here was to give councillors the opportunity to participate in what is an extremely important project. And I know at the top of the list for many councillors. So the Champlain room is a little tight at times. So we do have lots of space here so that we can have as many councillors participate as possible. Before we get started, I do want to do the acknowledgement. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire.
It's important to point out that the City of Ottawa is situated on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, whose culture continues to enrich our lives and land.
I should note here that simultaneous translation is available for this meeting. So I'll ask the committee coordinator to proceed with the roll call.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor Tierney.
Oui, présent.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Vice Chair Curry.
Here.
Chair DesRoches.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you. Notices of meeting information for meeting participants in the public. Nothing for that. Declarations of interest, none were received. Confirmation of minutes from the last meeting, which was on February 16, 2023. Is that confirmed? Confirmed. Next item is the presentation update on Stage 2 Light Rail Transit project. And before I proceed with that, I'm going to ask Councillor Curry, who's the Vice Chair, to move a motion. This is the first really substantive update that this committee has had for Phase 2. We certainly expect that will continue. Ça va continuer. On va avoir des mises à jour sur un projet très important.
We hope to have further updates on this very important project.
Rules. Normally there would be a report that would parallel the presentation. And as councillors can appreciate, really it is in some ways redundant in that the presentation contains considerable information. So what we're asking here and what we're asking this committee to approve is that going forward, that we would not require the report, that we would have the presentation, which would serve as kind of the principal means of communicating with this committee. Obviously, the expectation would be that these presentations are in writing, that they're translated, and that's provided as in advance as much as possible. And so yesterday we did receive the report. So Councillor Curry, I'll just ask you to move this motion if you could. I should add that this is what the process that is being undertaken at the Transit Commission as well. So I think we are in line with some of the other procedures that are in place with, I think, an equally important committee. Councillor Curry.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, whereas the Transit Services Department issues a quarterly memo to Council entitled O Train Stage 2 Light Rail Transit Project Quarterly Update, which is published on ottawa.ca and available to the public. Whereas the Transit Services Department has undertaken to provide draft copies of slides to members of the Light Rail Subcommittee in advance of meetings at which quarterly updates are provided. Therefore, be it resolved that the Light Rail Subcommittee direct Transit Services Department staff to provide a quarterly update with respect to the Stage 2 construction of the Light Rail Transit project until such time as the chair determines that they are no longer required and communicates this to the Light Rail Subcommittee. And be it further resolved that the Light Rail Subcommittee suspend Section 83, subsection 4, subsection A of the procedure bylaw, being bylaw number 2022-410, to receive these oral updates on an ongoing basis and dispense with the requirement for staff to provide separate written reports on these presentations.
Thank you, Councillor. Merci, Conseillère. I see Councillor Leeper with a question or comment.
Thanks. So obviously in the spirit of the greatest transparency to the public around an issue for which Council has deservedly had its wrist slapped, I'm just wondering first, what would the access be to written materials for the public pre and post meeting?
My understanding, I'll let staff comment on it as well, but the presentation, which would contain the substance and the considerable detail of the status of the project would be in a presentation. And the undertaking would be to make that presentation available well in advance. I think they are walking a bit of a fine line here in the sense that this project is moving at a very rapid pace, and it's been explained to me that they try to get kind of the freshest of photos, the freshest of information that comes in the days preceding the committee meeting. So the intent would be to have that available to councillors and to the public well in advance in the meeting. So I'll let staff, confirm that that's certainly their intent, and they're going to work towards that. Because as the councillor points out, it's extremely important that both the councillors and the public get this information in advance.
Mr. Chair, normally, if it's possible, we will provide those slides for the 48 or 24 hours before, but we will not be able to do better than that.
And post meeting, what is the access to the slides for residents?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My office would be pleased to make sure they are on ottawa.ca, whether it's in our minutes, whether it's in the meetings. We will put it and publish it for the media and the public.
So in order to see the slide presentation, it won't be on the agenda. There won't be any attachment to the agenda that contains the slides. Those are going to come to councillors a couple of days, a day, in the case of this meeting, hours before the meeting. And then post meeting, for members of the public who are seeking to see what was discussed, they would need to go to the SIRE page, to the city's legislative agenda page, click on minutes, or find the meeting, then click on minutes, then click on the attachment to the minutes. I just want to make sure I'm understanding where that's going to be public.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that it would be the standard operating procedure for all such matters.
Okay. I think it's interesting that we haven't seen delegations to this committee to this point, or at least not a lot of them, for an issue that is of considerable importance to residents. And I wonder how much of that is because we're not putting any kind of specifics about what we're going to be discussing on the committee agenda well in advance of the meeting. And I'm uncomfortable with not having lots of advance notice of specifically what we're going to be discussing on the agenda, where people are used to finding our reports. The written report, it strikes me that could be as simple as, please receive the following slides, and then append these slides to that agenda item, which would provide the transparency that residents are used to in the rest of our legislative agenda. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with this because it is sort of coming at us first thing this morning. But I'm struggling to see why we would vote to eliminate a procedural requirement that is part and parcel of the transparency with which council works on an issue on which we have obviously very high importance on transparency. So that's not a question. That's a comment. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And I think they're all valid points. And I think we're all paying particular attention to the renewed emphasis on transparency and focus. And why there's not delegations here, obviously the reports are extremely technical. And I think staff have done a good job in terms of providing those quarterly reports that we would have all received a few weeks ago that contain considerable amount of information that we're going to hear about today. So I'm certainly in the committee's hands. At the end of the day, the report really is an administrative undertaking from the staff to do that. It adds to their workloads to prepare for this meeting. And, but again, I'm in the hands of the committee if they wish to proceed. So look forward to hearing other views. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, if the committee is entertaining a motion that will waive the requirement for a written report because more or less the same information is going to be contained in the slide presentation, similar to what we're going to receive this morning, then I just want to emphasize the importance of releasing that slide presentation in advance so that our greatest infrastructure project in the city's history, members of the public who would like to review that presentation in advance, should they wish to either come as a delegation or provide questions or comments to their own local councillor, can do so. And I think this is very important. So I don't object to the motion because I understand what the motion is trying to accomplish, but I just want to emphasize the importance of releasing whatever is going to be presented at this committee in advance, particularly for the public to be able to consume that information and provide advance commentary should they choose to do so. Thank you.
Okay, these are all fair comments. I mean, I would have liked, this is a small committee and the intent is to have that focused attention. And I for one would like to see sort of a unanimous approach in terms of how we govern ourselves. So I'm not hearing that right now. Let's hear from the other speakers. But again, that's not something that certainly I as chair and prepared to push again if there's not sort of widespread support for this. So look forward to hearing from other councillors here. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm on the same page as my colleague. And the fact that I'm getting this now, when I haven't seen it, that concerns me, this motion. So if I do need prior knowledge that this is coming up, and I'm concerned just by the nature of what we're trying to do here. We want this information available. And I get that updates have to be made. Hey, I just had a big stage 2 update meeting this week for the public, well attended, for what's happening in our ward. So, but I don't think it's a reason to skip those steps. I think that we got to rethink that. I would suggest that we hold off on voting on this.
Thanks for the comments. Again, this is a matter of importance to this committee in terms of transparency. Again, if there's not, I would prefer that we all are on the same page in that. And if we're not, then perhaps it's just that we withdraw this motion again. The onus will just be on staff to prepare the report, to translate the report, to make it available. They'll be using the information that's in the quarterly report, to be information that's in the presentation. Again, if it's viewed as critical by some members, I would prefer to have unanimous support for that, and we can certainly sort of withdraw it today and continue the conversation or proceed as we do with other committees. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the fact that we're looking to withdraw this, I just wanted to point something out to members that are here. I'm the old guy on council now. This isn't anything new, and we have some unique challenges in this city. And I'm speaking after the fact. Our chair said we'll withdraw this. We have unique challenges in this city where we want to have up-to-date information and le présentation bilingue. It's a challenge all the time. So this is going to be the wrestling match that staff will have, is now if there's new information that comes around for the slide presentation, it could be 4 to 5 days out of sync, because I know for a fact in Le Quartier de Biquinville-sur-Ville, I have to have everything translated, and I know the challenges that go along with that. So I don't think there's anything nefarious here, and I'm just looking to the city clerk for a second, because being the Ontario caucus chair and being on FCM, is this a pretty standard, knowing we're withdrawing this anyway, I just want to to ask the question because is this pretty standard across municipalities or how does this operate usually?
Or if I can just be clear, Mr. Chair, is what standard?
Oh, when it comes to a verbal presentation, and you know, we're unique as Ottawa because I think we're really the only truly bilingual city in Canada that has to deal with this. Do we have examples like Toronto, Hamilton, and others? Do they have to post their presentations in advance, or is it similar to what is being suggested today? Again, it's being withdrawn, so it's kind of a moot point. I've watched other cities, and I see them presenting live and then posting their presentations after the fact.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's actually very true with regards to the presentations themselves. Often, though, it will be preceded by a report that is made public, and what the PowerPoint is to do is to sort of simplify or put it in lay folks' terms so that people can see and better appreciate it. So yes, I would think that's largely the same.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And so on that, I defer to the chair on if he wants to withdraw this or not. But I think we've clarified the question that we're not doing anything weird or different here. This is pretty standard practice. Anyway, back to you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and I think that was the intent. I appreciate the points of clarification, that the intent was really just to streamline here the process so that we could get the staff focused on doing the job. And again, perhaps Councillor Curry I might ask you just to withdraw it since we don't have kind of unanimous consent. I think it's important that we would have that. We'd make an exception today that we would proceed with the presentation, and then there would be a report going forward as is kind of the standing committee rules. And I fully expect that what you read in your quarterly report will be what you read in the report that's prepared. So again, doesn't hurt, I suppose. Councillor Curry.
Yeah, my only comment is, so this was, you wanted to try to see what the committee would think about it. This is really just a governance motion, right? I mean, my thought on this, when I first saw it, which was just yesterday, was we're trying to make sure we get the most up-to-date information because we are the LRT subcommittee, right? So if we have a report that is different than from the presentation we get a number of days later, there will be a disconnect. So there'll be not up-to-date information out in the report for the public, which would not be accurate. And then we get different information at the committee, and then there's a little bit of a disconnect. So that was all my thinking, that we know that when we're getting the presentation, we do it at a lot of other boards, we're getting the most up-to-date. But so in terms of withdrawing, I feel like we should vote on this, that we should just sort of say, okay, do we, what is the feeling? Like, as it's just, we are a new committee, right? What is the governance of this? What do we want? Do we want the most up-to-date? Like Councillor Leeper had, I thought, a good idea that maybe the report just simply says, this is the slide deck that will be presented. My thinking, and whatever the committee decides, I think we should decide as a committee, because we're so new, what we want. Because I certainly would like to have the most up-to-date and then have that shared with the public so that it's consistently, this is what we learned at the committee, and then this is what was presented. But I just offer you that as something to think about in terms of transparency of the accurate information and the most up-to-date.
Okay, thank you. So I guess the matter's still before us. Councillor Menard, and then Councillor Leeper.
Thanks very much, Chair. And Chair, I appreciate your suggestion here. I think that makes a lot of sense, just given the issues around transparency here. One thing that I'll just point out is a lot of time we have very important committees that deal with a lot of money as well on other topics. And sometimes things change before those committees. It doesn't mean we withdraw the reports for those committees. They'll update us when that happens. So the public still sees the report. If there's updates that have happened in those 4 days, staff update us at this committee. And I think that's the regular course of action here. And just given the context of the environment that we're in now with LRT in Ottawa, obviously we want to be on the same page with this. So Chair, appreciate the direction you were giving. And I do hope, I wasn't going to speak. I was hoping the mover would withdraw the motion, but I think we've got plenty of tools to deal with updates that may come late in the process, as Councillor was talking about, and hopefully we can have the same thing here for a very important file. Thank you.
Okay, I couldn't hear you very well, Councillor. Maybe some other councillors heard you better who are listening. So I think you spoke towards kind of keeping the status quo rather than sort of having a favorable view of the motion.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Is this better, Chair? If I speak up, can you hear me a bit better now, or still bad in the room?
Yeah, I think it's a little foggy coming through. I don't know if it's your mic or what have you.
I don't know. It's on my computer. I'll leave it be. I think your suggestion, Chair, was the right one, and I appreciate it. And I think it's consistent with other city reports. So thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Did Councillor Curry withdraw the motion?
I think she did.
No.
Councillor Curry, is your intent to withdraw the motion so that we can move on and
That's too funny. So you can't hear me either. If we're calling in, you can't really hear us in the council chambers?
we can hear you. Yours is a little more clear. Thanks.
I know, I said, I thought it would be good to vote on it just so we're 100% clear as a new committee. Whether it fails or not, I just think it should be good if we vote on it, then we know what we want. Because my concern is that we want to make sure we're getting the most up to date. Other councillors have suggested other things. I don't know if staff have any other comments, but I think we should vote. It doesn't matter. I just think we should vote. Then we have clarity for this new committee.
Okay, there's your answer, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you. So yeah, the motion is still to be voted on. In which case I would simply say I don't necessarily agree that the information needs to be up to the minute as we receive it. You know, compared to a week ago or a week and a half ago, I don't know if the amount of track laid has gone from 95% to 97%, and that's less important to me than some of the higher level trends with respect to progress on the LRT line. And you know, one of the other stakeholders who I want to take into consideration is the media as well. I think having hard and fast numbers out in the public domain with lots of lead time allows the media to investigate those on residents' behalf and do their job. I know it's difficult for the press, as under-resourced as they are right now, to try to pursue some of these stories that are really important ones for the residents of Ottawa. And the Fifth Estate is probably one of the critical stakeholders in this discussion who are going to be reliant on information that is published well in advance. So I can say fairly certainly at this point, I won't be supporting this motion. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Chair. So verbal updates are not unprecedented at committees. We use them at Board of Health for the both the chair's report and the medical officer of health report, similar in police board. We certainly use it at transit commission meetings for up-to-date updates. Although I could see with a quarterly update, because the time frame's longer, maybe that's a little bit different and the information isn't quite as timely. I think there's probably a reasonable way to do this, but we're not going to solve it on the floor today. I think there's a few issues that have been raised about advanced notification so that councillors or the public or the media can prepare. That's fair. I think there's also how it gets published or shared after the fact. And I think there's probably a happy compromise somewhere in there that would even allow for up-to-date information. But perhaps if I would also encourage the mover to withdraw this, or we defer a decision on this until our next meeting next month so we can work out some of these things. I think there's I've a couple things in mind that could resolve this and still allow us to have timely and up-to-date information, but address the concerns around preparing in advance. So we're not quite there yet, but I think we could get there with a little bit more time to discuss amongst ourselves. That's not necessarily the best use of our time here on committee today.
Thank you, Councillor. Those are wise comments. Councillor Curry, I wonder if you'd consider withdrawing today so that we can perhaps do some more groundwork and pursue some of the suggestions that we've heard today to make sure that we're still streamlined, but getting timely information, or we can certainly defer your motion to the next meeting. Councillor Curry.
Sure, that sounds great. If Councillor Gower has some suggestions and we don't want to spend more time here today, let's do that then and come back with something. Sure.
Thank you. So the motion is withdrawn. I'll ask for the committee's consent, though, for today that we proceed with the presentation. And if there's agreement, we'll do that. So thank you for that conversation. That was helpful. we'll proceed with the presentation. I know Councillor Brockington had a question off the bat that the slides that were provided to us, I think, had some reference to being confidential. However, I think probably that's a watermark that likely was included there once it was under development, and you know, the documents that we have today are not of a confidential nature. I didn't note that, but I trust Councillor Brockington to see that.
Chair, I'll just note the
Councillor Brockington.
slides I looked at last night were all watermarked confidential. And so I didn't share anything with my residents because I thought maybe there was something in there that should not be released, but I don't know if that was a draft copy and just not removed. So I'm seeking clarification that the content of today's presentation, which is contained in the document shared with us yesterday, is in fact public.
So, Mr. Chair, there's two presentations in the document. There's obviously the general update, which I assume is not marked confidential. And then there's the update on the delegation of authority. And when we get to that, we can speak to I think there was a footer about, we'll get external counsel's advice on the footer. But if the general update was marked confidential, then that was in error.
These were just the slides of the station's chair, so I didn't see anything at all confidential about this.
Yeah, well, a little late if it is confidential and it's been distributed. So we'll deal with it as we go through the presentation. If you see it there, and I would fully expect that the slides that are developed for this committee are fully intended for the public domain. So I don't know if that was perhaps just left in there once in the draft stage. So we'll look at it as we proceed. Thank you so much for that question, Councillor Brockington. If there's nothing else, we'll proceed with the presentation. Thank you. I should mention, the clerk has reminded me that they've turned up the volume for those that are online, so that we can hopefully have a better clarity to hear the members that are coming in through Zoom. Thanks. Madame Panet.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just before Renee starts off the presentation, I just want to apologize for the confusion with respect to the deck. Was confidential just in terms of the draft that was being circulated, but the presentation is not confidential today. Thank you. And Renee will now kick off the presentation.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous, Monsieur le Président, les commissionnaires et toutes les équipes. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be here today at our second light rail subcommittee meeting of this term of council. To start things off, Michael Morgan, who is the director of our rail construction program, will provide a construction update on the Stage 2 light rail transit project. We're excited to share new photos and videos that highlight the great progress being made. Following the Stage 2 presentation, we will provide a review of the city manager's delegated authority with respect to Stage 1 and 2 light rail report. I'm very pleased that Sharon Vogel, who's partner and co-chair of the Construction and Infrastructure Law Practice Group at Singleton Puckhart, Renals Vogel LLP, is here with us today. Sharon has prepared a presentation on her analysis of the delegations of authority relating to Stage 1 and 2 light rail, which we will share with us today. I will now pass things to Michael Morgan. Merci bien.
Thank you, Renee. We'll just put the slides up and we'll go through this. So there's roughly 70 slides, so we'll go through at pace just to give you an update. A lot of good photos here. So just go to the first slide, which just shows, just as a reminder of the line 2, 4, line 1, 3. We'll focus on the east to start, just to give you a quick update on the progress on the stations. So if you pass through to the next slide is just the header for the east, and then we'll go into the discussion on the actual station. So here you see Montreal Station. So this is the view from above. You see still the laneways there that are reserved for staging for construction activity. You see the station coming out of the ground above. And then critically, what you don't see is down underneath the station is they've made very good progress on the communication rooms, which is where we're going to put the train control equipment. So train control equipment, communication systems, all in the rooms that are kind of under the station that you can't see. So good progress there. And those are critical to kind of enabling us to start train testing later this year. So if you go to the next station. Voici la station Jeanne d'Arc. Si tu vois, il y a comme deux bâtiments à gauche et à droite. Ces deux bâtiments-là sont pour les systèmes.
There are two buildings on the right, on the left, for the control systems. They are our priority to make sure that we can start testing the trains as soon as possible.
So these are the stations where we're going to control there's turnouts and switches just to the left of the screen. So this is going to be the first turnouts that get put into service for us to enable train testing between this station and Montreal Station. So that's the first place where you'll see testing of the train control system. And we are expecting to see the overhead wires go up between this station and all the way back to Blair this spring. So with the aim to get trains onto this line by September, October for early testing. Go to the next station, just have a quick look. So Convent Glen, it's a little bit further behind. Jeanne d'Arc is the most advanced at roughly 80%. Convent Glen is it's probably in the 30 to 40% range, so a lot of work to do there. And again, Orleans Boulevard Road, Jeanne d'Arc as well are both being reconfigured in the end state. I was at Jeanne d'Arc yesterday, and the road configuration there for pedestrians is pretty scary. So we are going to rework those roads to enable an easier access point to get to both of these stations. You go to the next slide, you'll see a few photos here of Place d'Orleans. So you see good progress there. So this, what you don't see is the elevator has been dropped in, or sorry, the escalator has been dropped into the station. So there's one long up escalator that gets you up to that second level. But this is a really well-connected station, access from Champlain Bridge, access from a new dedicated transit-only pedestrian bridge to enable a fare paid zone, and access from the original pedestrian bridge that goes across the highway. Goes to the park and ride, goes to the mall on the one side. So a lot of connections into the station, but the station is kind of set lower down in the ground. And so there is a bit of an elevation change there. You go to the next slide, you see another view of the station from a different angle. Oh, go back one, perfect, Eric. So this station, again, on the left, you see that covered roofway is where the up escalator is going to be. On the kind of the middle of the page, you see there's a series of posts there where the noise wall is going to go in. And so people who are standing on the platform there'll be a noise wall in between the platform area and the roadway. And you see a little bit of roadway that will come back. And so when the project's finished, we're going to repave that road and move it back over to give back to the shoulder through this area, because it is tight for traffic and it is missing the shoulder, but that'll be returned to general traffic when the project is done. You go to the next slide. This shows you a bit of an overview of the new pedestrian bridge. So the white pedestrian bridge, we're out of sequence on the, there we go. So the white pedestrian bridge, so that enables people who are coming to the bus loop. They don't need to pass through a set of fare gates. They'll be able to go up to that bridge and drop right into Place d'Orleans Station. The setup of this station is basically to enable future flows. You know, the capacity of the existing pedestrian bridge wasn't big enough to be able to support all of the riders. And so a second pedestrian bridge had to be added to accommodate just the volumes of people that are going to be using this station. If you go to the next station. So end of the line here, so trim station. And so in the foreground, what you see is, again, the communications and signal building. So that's kind of the one that's prioritized to enable us to start train testing as quickly as possible. You see the pedestrian bridge there. So that's a fare paid zone. Again, the buses will drop you off. You won't have to pass through gates to get up to that bridge and into the transit platform. You can also approach from the street if you want to just go through. There will be a set of fare gates on the building in the top left there. So lots of access points to the station. But this is the end of the line, and they are starting to put track in this area this year. Go to the next slide, please. So just in terms of what's upcoming, so progress on all 5 stations, we're expecting to be able to complete the rail installation end to end. So have all the rail, all from Blair all the way to Trim completed, have the catenary work completed as well, and start that early train testing in the fall. So we're going to have a lot of activity on this line over the coming months. The first big change you'll see is the catenary wires going up in the next 2 to 3 months. Go to the next slide, please. Just in terms of impacts, and so we're still seeing, still work closing the high-speed lanes. I know a couple of weeks ago we had a major slowdown because of some work we needed to do, and so we are trying to minimize the impacts. We are expected to see some additional closures of the high-speed lane from time to time to allow us to work very close to the edge of the guideway. Montreal Road has a water main that still needs some work, and so we're going to have to come back and do some activity there. And then Jeanne d'Arc, there's a variety of things kind of that are changing, but we're doing our best to keep everyone apprised of these changes. Sometimes there are last minute road closures, and we try to avoid those if at all possible, but some cases it's just not possible. So I know the communications team will continue to work closely with the councillors to provide them with good updates on when there are changes and closures and how long they will last. We go to the next slide. We can just talk a little bit about the schedule. So in the quarterly update, we showed a delay of 64 days to substantial completion. We've been able to claw that back by 13 days, so it's down to 51 days delay to the east completion, which puts it to basically the middle of January. That would be when the infrastructure builder would hand the system over to the city. Once it's handed over to the city, at that point, the city, with our partners at RTG, we would do a trial running period for 3 weeks. And then depending on how that goes, if we need longer for the trial running period, we'll use it. Then there'll be a period where we, use the system internally, just to make sure all of the transit operators, customer service providers are all ready to go. And then it would be open to the public. I think critically in this schedule, what you see is that final commissioning period is going to be right through the winter. So we've learned a lot of lessons already on winter, gas switch heaters and other things, but this will be the final test for this system will be right through January and February. Go to the next slide. We'll move over to the west now. So there are 3 or 4 tunnel slides we'll get to in a second that they'll buzz through quickly just to give you a sense of how we're building the system. So Westboro Station, so this was the demolition. So we got in there last year. They are down at track level now, putting in catenary foundations all through this area between here all the way through to from Tunney's. I think they've started a couple of them, but from here all the way through to Kitchissippi, they are trying as quickly as possible to get those OCS foundations in. There is a big box culvert in this area they're doing repairs on. So there's a bunch of utility work that preps for before the guideway can start, but that's all started and lots of activity down there. If you go to the next slide. Just a quick look at Kitchissippi. So this is where we've had to excavate out the new guideway from the existing rock. So to extend the existing transway rock cut to basically straighten out the path for the trains to get to the cut and cover tunnel. We're getting very close here to being kind of wrapped up with, I would say, the very noisy work. And we're getting to the point now where we're going to put up a tower crane and start constructing the station. So that will start this spring. As soon as we get that tower up, we'll be able to start erecting the station, which is very good news. The next slide shows you a photo of the new temporary pedestrian bridge that the constructor put in. So this is a pretty heavy duty bridge. I'm pretty happy with the result. I was worried about them putting in something, I didn't know what we were going to get, but the result is very good. And so we've been able to maintain connectivity to the bus stops in this area. And that bridge has opened up the extra excavation to provide that final link between the SJAM cut and cover tunnel and the Kitchissippi station area. So excellent progress there. Go to the next slide. So just in terms of excavation through this area, everywhere you see the basically the struts that kind of go across the station. So this area has been largely excavated. They're into the bottom of the excavation, putting in the invert slab or the bottom of the tunnel. And they have started, I'll show you a photo in a minute of the Everest Traveler system, which is what they're using to actually build the tunnel. We have some very good photos of that, but a lot of good progress through here. And this is a nice straight shot. And so they're able to set up a bit of a production line, which we'll show you in a second. The next slide, please. This is just a view looking back towards kind of from the other direction. You see, the biggest issue in terms of construction is really access. And so they put access points for pedestrians in a couple of spots along this way. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit more activity in terms of what this looks like. So this is a bit of a close-up view of the work that's being done. So they build the tunnel up, basically pour the floor or the invert of the tunnel, do the walls, including waterproofing, then structural walls, and then they come back and they do the roof system. So this is what you see here is a photo of the construction workers putting the rebar in place for the roof of the tunnel. If you go to the next slide. Just a bit of an overhead look at Byron Linear Park on this slide. Just waiting for it. There we go. So an overhead look of Byron Linear Park and the excavation. You see the slides are a little bit out of sync here, but you see a bit of the tunnel structure that's being formed. If we go to the next one, I'll show you just a close-up of how the system all works up. So this is, again, this is the other end of the line. This is zone 5 near Ambleside, where we had to detour traffic. So the tunnel does go under that road, and we are kind of turning the corner to get to Lincoln Field Station. Go to the next slide, please. So this is a split system. So if you see on the photograph on the left is basically the sequence is, you know, doing the floor or the invert of the tunnel, then you do the waterproofing on the walls, you build up the rebar on the sides and in the center. Then once you've done that, you move the Everest Traveler system into place. This is a custom built system for our project. And then you come back and you do the rebar over the roof of the structure. Go to the next slide, you'll see the next 3 steps. So then they'll come back and they'll do essentially what is a 3-day, or sorry, 1 day, 12 to 16 hours pour to do the walls and the roof. That's done in one go. That allows us to essentially do a 15-meter section of tunnel at a time. And then the Everest system is collapsed and pulled out of the way, and it's slid essentially down the guideway. And then you see on the right-hand side, that's the finished product. So nice dry tunnel there on the right with the lighting. So then they'll come back afterwards. They'll try to do as much as possible in terms of installation on the tunnel, electrical, jet fans, radiating cables for the emergency radio system. They'll do as much as they can before they put the track in, because it's much easier to do that work without the tracks in place. So the tracks will be actually one of the last things to be done. Go to the next slide. So bit of a view of Lincoln Fields there, where we are. So Lincoln Fields is in very good shape. This is probably our most advanced station on the west. It's in the 80 to 90% range. And so we're likely going to start installing the communication systems. Again, this is a location that has a communication signal room. And so that's been prioritized to ensure we can do train testing as soon as possible. Go to the next slide. So Iris Station. So still a lot of work to be done in the area generally. This is an area where we redirected the Pinecrest Creek, where we had to build a series of bridges, temporary bridges, permanent bridges. What you see there is the permanent bridge on Iris Road. So that's in good shape. And then on the right-hand side, you see Iris Station, which is a bit of a more of a rural approach. So a lighter footprint for a station in the area. So it's going to be a very good station for that neighborhood. Go to the next one. We'll see Algonquin Station on the next slide. So the big head house at the top. So fare gates, and then on the right-hand side, you see the new pedestrian bridge coming in from Algonquin Station. So the students will be able to walk directly in a weather-controlled pedestrian bridge to get into the station. And then from there, they drop down into the underground station. Go to the next slide, we just see a quick view of the bridge itself, which has gone into place. And so that's gone really well. And one of the things that, you know, one of the impetuses for this bridge is really just to make sure that we eliminate foot traffic across that roadway, which is going to be a major roadway for the buses, keep people up and out of the way and allow them to drop right into the station from the inside. Go to the next station, next drawing. Queensview Station. So this is between the Leons and the IKEA. So we are planning a super weekend, so a closure of the 417. Right now it's tentatively planned for June 16th and 17th, subject to permitting and other things, to drop in a pedestrian bridge that will go across the highway at this location. So you'll be able to get from one side of the highway to the other directly into the station. If you go to the next station. Bayshore Station. So a lot of activity at Bayshore Station. There is a second entrance that's being built just to the right, an emergency egress point due to the volumes at the station and the need for kind of secondary access. That's what you see is being excavated in the right-hand side. But you also see that it's a pretty tight area, right? In terms of access to the mall, access to a bus loop, at that location. Trying to get trucks in and out of this area has been quite challenging, but contractors done a good job of working closely with the mall, and there have been few, if any, complaints to me about the construction and congestion in this area. But they're working on that. This is probably after the tunnel. This is the next most critical area on the west. If you go to the next station, please. Next slide, please. So this is the end of the line, Moody Station. So you see it's coming out of the ground pretty quickly here. It's in good shape. The platforms are a little bit offset at this location because of the proximity to a curve, but this will be the end of the line. And obviously we've worked very closely with the community to maintain the two-way on the adjacent road and to make sure that the bus loop that drops people off here coming from Canada is as efficient as possible. So you'll be able to basically get dropped off from the bus and walk right onto the train at this location. So it'll be a very good setup for users. If you go to the next few slides, show a photo of some photos of the storage facility. So the first one is of I believe this is the maintenance of way equipment. So all of the track maintenance equipment, the snow removal equipment, any equipment that RTGs needs to maintain the system will be housed in this building. If you go to the next slide, we'll show this. So this is the administrative building for the operators. This is where in the morning during launch, the train will come out of the storage building. It will stop at this platform. The operators will exit the building and get into the cab of the train, and then they will take that train into service starting at Moody Station, which is just east of here. So that's the admin building for our operators. If you go to the next one. So this is just a kind of a high level overview of the actual maintenance facility. So it's a light maintenance facility, including a car wash, overhead walkway to be able to do kind of light activity, nothing heavy. If you need to replace wheels or replace bogies, all of that work needs to be done at Belfast. But this facility will allow us to add sand, add liquids, clean the vehicles, do preliminary inspections on those vehicles at this location. Go to the next slide, please. So, and then at the end of the big building that you'll see from the highway at the end is the storage building. So this is where the vehicles will be stored overnight. So they'll come back when they come out of service, they'll go through the inspection building. They'll, get their nightly checks, and then they'll be stored overnight before being kind of reactivated in the morning. Go to the next one, please. So just in terms of upcoming work and the schedule challenge generally. So it's really about the tunnel, making progress on the tunnel, making progress on covering that up, building the roof and then covering it up and reinstating the roadway. So we will have a closure of Woodruff coming up in the summer that we need to do to basically take off the temporary bridge that's at Woodruff and rebuild the road essentially. So a few kind of key activities there. Go to the next slide. We'll talk about mobility. So some of these are known. I think that I don't think there's any surprises here. The two big changes are just really the need to close Woodruff for a couple of weeks to rebuild the road, and then obviously the closure for the 417 to put the new pedestrian bridge in. So you go through the list. Transway is already closed. That's very, very well known. Richmond Road, it's a bit of we're going to have to do some things on and off peak to deal with some issues. There is the Ambleside detour, which we're still considering, the need to put Ambleside on a two-way detour, even if it's for a short duration, but that we're still looking at opportunities to accelerate some of the work in that area to reduce the impacts on the residents, because we are seeing some impacts through this area. And then the last one is the Woodruff closure, which I spoke about, should be in the spring. If you go to the next slide, please. A few other things. So Carling Avenue. So there's still a lot of work in and around Carling Avenue, Lincoln Fields. Still needing to maintain that original bus loop until we get into service. And so we're going to start constructing the new bus loop pretty quickly here. Transway closure again, 417 Pinegrass Interchange. So we are looking to maintain that closure through to the fall, at which point we put that back into service for the winter. And then the last one, there's some additional closures there that we need to do, just some short-term things to get access and to do some various modifications. Go to the next slide, please. So Transway Iris to Baseline, obviously that's a permanent closure now, and then the Woodruff pedestrian bridge. So this is for the high school. So in speaking with the contractor yesterday, we are trying to get that that particular pedestrian bridge reopened. So this is the new bridge that replaces the original one, get it back into, get that new one into service in June. So that's the current target for that bridge. If you go to the schedule slide, which is next, still no change on the schedule, still the 17 months that we've described previously. Still the critical path is through the tunnel, making sure that the tunnel is built as quickly and efficiently as possible. That's the schedule for the west. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about, we'll talk about the trains first. So for the fleet expansion of 38 new vehicles on the Confederation line, we have accepted 10. Those are part of the normal rotation on the stage 1 fleet. And so we're burning them in and getting additional hours. 3 are in final inspection. So before we accept these vehicles, we do put them out for 1,000 kilometers on the network just to make sure that they are up to date. And obviously we're checking that all the latest and greatest modifications of those vehicles are in place. Any of the lessons learned that we, any changes, modifications that have been made over the years are applied to those vehicles before we accept them. And then the remainder are in various states of production. Go to the next slide, please. So we'll talk about Trillium Line to the south. So we've got some good photos here of the progress that's being made. If you go to the next slide, we'll take a quick look at Bayview. And so this is the a shot of the pedestrian bridge that will connect to the future development on the right-hand side of the page. And so there was plans for a large tower to go at that location. So that pedestrian bridge is ready. And then the head house on the left will have a set of fare gates. So you can actually access the station from that location coming off of the street, or you can, if you're coming from the development, the set of elevator banks there that would take you up and over to that new building when it arrives. To go to the next slide, just talk a little bit about Corso Italia. So, one last slide on Bayview Station. So just some kind of interior shots. There's the elevator bank that's going in. And then on the right-hand side, we have there's a walk around. So when this line was in service originally, we only had a single platform at this location. And so if a train were to get stuck, we essentially backed up traffic on the entire line. In this setup, we have a kind of alternate platform. So if we do have a problem with one train, we can still continue the service. Previously, we would essentially shut down the Trillium Line if a train got stopped at this location for any reason. Now we have a second platform, which is a long walk around, but it is sheltered. But the intent would be to use a primary platform adjacent to Bayview State, the current Bayview Station, as the primary means of exit and entry to the trains. And this would just be used in the rare occasions when we have something to do on the vehicle at the end of the line. Go to the next line, please. So Corso Italia, so from a few weeks ago, still wrapped up in winter. So they are working on the interior, trying to get the glass. As soon as the glass goes up, that's when the wrap will come down, but the wrap was there to enable them to continue work through the winter. Go to the next station. This wrapping is obviously a little bit more windswept, and so it's not as good, but it doesn't look as good. But what you see down on the platform, kind of in between the construction equipment, is a finished platform edge. The transit shelters on the platform, you see the lighting poles there, and what they're working on now is the elevator bank. So replacing a single elevator that was there previously with 2 new elevators to provide redundancy going up to the top, and we're going to reuse the existing fare shelter that was there in the first place. So it's actually, the picture doesn't do the progress justice, but the station is coming along nicely. Go to the next slide, please. Just a quick look in Dow's Lake Tunnel. So this tunnel, we're obviously upgrading with new jet fans and a series of changes to deal with the tunnel ventilation requirements. You see the concrete ties there. The other big change I think that riders will be very excited about is on the left. You see there's little standoffs, and those are standoffs for radiating cable, which will allow you to make a cell call when you're in the tunnel. And so now it used to be that your call would drop out when you went through this tunnel, and now we're going to enable it so that you don't have to worry about losing your connection as you travel through this tunnel. Go to the next slide. Carlton Station. Again, this station's in very good shape. You look a 2-platform station, the transit shelters are installed, the lights are installed, the masts are there. So they're going to be coming in with the communications equipment and other things to finalize the fit out of the station. There's a bunch of work related to the underpass that's just out of view, and that work is continuing. They should have that opened up in the summer at the latest. If you go to the next slide, please. Just guideway generally. So in terms of the track and track progress, there's one final segment of track over Hunt Club Road, which needs to be completed. So that's kind of the last segment of ballasted track. And then they're also working on all the direct fixation track that goes onto the Elwood Bridge and onto the airport elevated guideway. So those are kind of the two main areas where they're working now, but they are planning to have that finished up in the next couple of months. The plan was to get as much ballasted track complete as possible by the end of last year. They were, I would say, largely successful in that, save and except for Hunt Club, which they knew was going to be done in the spring, but that's kind of the last bit of ballasted track that we need to complete the track on the network. You go to the next slide, please. So there we see Elwood Diamond grade separation. And you see that where the orange tarps are there, that's where they're actually doing some of that direct fixation in winter. So the ballast you can't do in winter, or you can't, it's more difficult to do in winter, depending on where you are in the stage of the work. This is a case where you can actually heat and hoard the area to be able to do some of the direct fixation over the course of the winter. So that has been progressing. They are making good progress there. Go to the next slide, please. So Walkley Station. So this station is in very good shape. They're actually working on the multi-use pathway now, just to the on this photo, it would be to the left of the page to kind of reinstate that. That was taken out of service for a number of years, and the station's in pretty good shape. There should be one more photo of the station on the next slide, looking from the other angle. See where you see the tarps and things, that's where they're working on the elevator bank, but otherwise the station platform, again, the platform is poured, the transit shelters are in place. They're just looking at coming back and putting in the communications equipment now. If you go to the next slide, please. So back to the Walkley MSF, the primary maintenance building is coming along nicely. There is a kind of a secondary train inspection building, which has two 80-meter bays to allow them to do fueling, cleaning, sanding. So there is quite a bit of maintenance capacity at the new facility. And so they're just wrapping this work up. You see it's in pretty decent shape. They're working on the exhaust systems to exhaust the fumes from the vehicles when they're in the maintenance shop. Go to the next slide, please. Greenboro Station. So again, so we lengthened the platform. You see the glass is in place as a bit of a windscreen, the shelter's there, the lighting's there. We need to come back and bring in all the communication systems. This one, we haven't done a lot of work on this area over the last little while, but it's in very good shape. We just need to come back and do the communication systems at this location. Go to the next slide. So South Keys. So a lot of work is actually inside the station because there's a bit of an underpass there and stairway elevator bank to get up to the platform. So that's coming along nicely. If you go to the next slide, please. So the next station down the line is Leitrim, which has always been in good shape. So this one was wrapped for the winter. And again, if you look closely at the platform there, the shelters are kind of being assembled. The lighting is in place. There is some work that's coming along. And then just to the upper left, you see the bus operator building, which is being wrapped and closed. And then this whole area, the top of the screen, will be reworked to create the new park and ride at this location. Go to the next slide. We'll see Bowesville. This is a bit of an older photo, it's more of a wintry look. But again, they wrapped it as much as possible to be able to work on the inside. The track is through this area, though they weren't using the track in this area over the winter. They will be using it. This will be one of the kind of first new areas of track that opens up once they get into the spring weather. The first kind of test trains, currently the test track is from Hunt Club to just shy of Leitrim. Over the coming months, they will extend that test track to go from Hunt Club all the way to Linebank Station. So the next big area where you'll see the train come out and surface kind of on the network is all the way down to Bowesville and then to Linebank Station. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is the track. You can't quite see Linebank Station, it's just out of view there, but the final tracks are all the way through to the end. You see the signal system, the signal indicators on either side of the track there are being installed. And so Siemens is out in full force putting in all the signal equipment now with the aim to test this section next on the network. Go to the next slide, please. And then Linebank Station, you see the wrappings come down, save and except for the area where the elevator banks are. A lot of work underneath. There is a bit of an operator facility, washrooms and other things kind of down at the lower level. But this is a significant station, a significant structure. The track through this area, I believe, is largely complete. This is a ballasted area. And so we'll be able to get trains to this location very soon. If you go to the next slide, please. Upland Station. So this one was fully wrapped in winter. A lot of work going on in the inside, again, just to be able to allow them to advance over the course of the last few months. So next update, we'll be able to provide you a photo without the wrapping. And then if you go to the airport station, should be the next slide. Oh, so here's the interior of some of the wrapping for Uplands, and then the next slide should show you the airport concourse. And so where you see the cones there, that's where the fare gates are going to be. So you'll come from international, so that's just adjacent to international departures. So you'll arrive through this area. There's a short concourse where those cones are is where the fare gates will be. And then in the distance there, you see the sliding doors. You'll step out onto the train platform. And that's where you'll pick up the Alstom train to get to South Keys. Go to the next slide. In terms of activity, track installation, rail systems installation is underway. They are looking to complete that. Saddle vehicle testing, we need to test them on the entire line. We had pretty good photos of the station, the bridge construction, and then obviously we need to finish with trial running substantial completion. Just as terms of a marker in the ground for where we need to be to achieve some of our objectives, we're really looking for an August 1st date to be able to run trains end to end. So by August 1st, we want to be able to see a train going from Bayview all the way to Limebank and a train from South Keys all the way to the airport. That's kind of in terms of like a check-in point for the system. That's kind of one of those key activities we want to see. If they can't achieve that August 1st date, then we're going to start seeing delays day by day. Essentially, every delay we see against that August 1st would result in a delay to the start of the subsequent activities. So we're really monitoring and looking for them to achieve that. Go to the next slide, please. So in terms of schedule, so again, there's that I gave you that August 1st date in terms of a specific kind of target. Last year when I spoke to the committee, it was about, the August, September being a stretch target. We are looking to complete training through the September period, and we would start the trial running kind of at or near the third week of September, with a final handover in early October. And then depending on the outcomes and the results, at that point, we'll need to assess if there's additional time required before we actually put the system into service and open it up to passengers. And so we don't have a firm date for when that's going to take place. And that's in part because we want to respond to the performance we see on the system over the August and September timeframe. Once we see how the system performs, then we'll be in a better position to provide a recommendation to committee on the next steps and the timeframes for the next steps. Go to the next slide. Just in terms of some impacts to multi-use pathways, and so we're starting to see some of these clean up. We showed you the picture of Corso Italia. Obviously, the MUP has been reinstated there, so that full north-south Trillium line MUP is back in decent condition, even at Carling or Dow's Lake Station. I believe that's back in place now, so we're in decent shape there. Next slide, please. A few more kind of changes that were likely coming. Hunt Club Road, we're not quite finished there, and there's obviously that includes a pedestrian bridge over the roadway, and so we need to connect in that pedestrian. I mean, it's an integrated structure, so it's one structure that has both the pedestrian bridge and the track, and so we need to kind of commission that, put that into service. So there may be a need for some lane closures as part of that. And then obviously in the south, we're realigning an intersection. There's a bit of a skew today, so making it a true four-way stop, and so we'll have to do some road closures at that location as well to put that into service. Next slide, please. So just kind of a look ahead for a committee in terms of what is coming forward. We do have the peer review. We are working on a response to the peer review that was commissioned with a consortium of Sistra and RETP Dev, so that's coming soon. We do want to come back and provide a bit of a deep dive on the parameters and the metrics that are being used for the trial running period and the final commissioning period. We want to spend some time on that with the committee, and obviously bring back a report on the public inquiry and the recommendations. So you go to the next slide, please. So communication updates. So we continue to remain engaged with councillors through regular ad hoc and scheduled meetings as necessary. We continue to provide the quarterly memo update, and we continue to respond to ad hoc requests for community presentations. We're happy to do those. Those are, we have a lot of them. And if there's a group or area that's underrepresented, we're happy to send the team out to do those updates and presentations. Go to the next slide, please. And then just to, I guess, in terms of look ahead, we've had for example, the new Stadler trains for some time now, and we haven't really allowed the public onto those trains. And so we are looking for an opportunity, say through doors open, to have people kind of get a sneak peek of those trains, maybe not in service, but parked somewhere where they can get on and off and test out the seats. So we would potentially, as part of doors open, but the communications team at the city is working on a plan to provide early access to some of the sites to be able to see and look and feel, experience them a little bit before they go into service. And we're going to bring more information on that back in the May timeframe. So we're looking forward to that. The next slide. So just the next slide in terms of how to get in touch with us. So this is obviously the YouTube channel. This is on YouTube, and we have some videos, which we'll show in a second here, but a variety of ways to get in touch with the team. And please, by all means, if there's questions or concerns, do not hesitate to reach out. And I think that's it for the slides. There may be a video that we want to show now. It's a 4-minute video, if you'll indulge us.
Chair, si vous voulez bien, on peut passer à la période de questions pour cette partie.
If you'd like, Mr. Chair, we can move on to question period for this part of the presentation. Have you finished? Are you ready for questions? All right. Councillor Tierney, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you for the great work and the great presentation. Very thorough. I appreciate that. In the East, we've always been excited, not only because we're the highest modal split, and I'll keep saying that, but I've been very engaged with the community, actually chairing some of our East End meetings to ensure the public's aware of how things are taking place and what is going on. Little news to me, and forgive me with budget and everything, maybe I missed it, about the slippage on schedule for 51 days, which I'm fine with. I prefer us to open the train late than to open it the wrong way. So I'm quite fine with that. That being said, I think until people see things, they don't realize what's happening. And I'm very excited for 2023 for the testing of the train in the middle of the highway. That's going to wake people up. My question is related to, and I continue to ask this, is there a game plan when we're going to start talking about the new routes? Because I think that's critical. I think stage one is the backbone, but stage two is the game changer, because you're going to have that spoken hub model of regular service. You'll probably end up seeing the same operator over and over, doing those circles to get to Montreal Road Station versus going back to Blair or having a dead-headed bus that might be late. Do we know when we're going to start doing public consultations in regards to the new routes that are going to access those stations?
Chair, I should provide probably a memo in April regarding the job that we are doing on the route review. So I will let you know when exactly we will be able to consult the public, but we'll start first with the councillors before to go to the public.
Great, and thank you. And I truly appreciate it. I think there's great excitement. People see the tracks, they see the catenaries. We've gone through a little bit of hell getting the construction done, but people I realize no pain, no train, and we're very excited for that. So as soon as you know when we can start engaging the community, the 4 East End colleagues, I think that'd be helpful information. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michael, for the presentation. Always great to see you. Apologies, I didn't come in person today, but as you know, I work very closely with the whole Stage 2 LRT team. I meet with them every week, and I really appreciate all their help. I mean, we had 3 meetings last week. We had community meetings that were smaller to deal with noise and dust and all that concerns. Plus, we had the big meeting to give the whole enchilada of what's happening in the West End and the construction. So very, very useful and appreciated always. You mentioned about the Woodruff pedestrian bridge is a big concern. You talked about spring. It's funny because in the presentation, they said summer. I know it's not a big difference, but every month matters on that bridge, I'll tell you. So I'll tell you that's really important to people. They miss it terribly, that pedestrian bridge, and we're waiting very anxiously to see it in place, given we weren't supposed to have a delay. We were supposed to have the bridge wasn't supposed to be torn down until the one was built, and that didn't happen. So those are things that we're concerned about, and I know you're aware of that. Noise control still goes on. As you know, it's much more intense in the West End. The West End is literally in people's backyards, literally. And it's why we've had to have these extra meetings. We're very concerned about the night noise and the control. And again, we're working with the team, but just have to emphasize how hard it has been, because this isn't a couple of months project, this is years. And people get very despondent. And I just had, even while I was talking, listening to this, I saw an email come in about dust and dirt, and the days are getting dry, and so that's a concern, and it's a problem for people like at 75 Cleary. I know Councillor Leeper had to deal with this before. So all these areas where it's very invasive during the construction phase, they're looking forward to it and they're very polite and very nice. So just letting you know. Connectivity, major concerns on Moody. I'm concerned about active transportation connections to the station over the overpass. The fact that Kev would, we tried to get it in the contract, they overpriced it, but it's still really important. And I want to make sure that that stays in there. That is essential for my colleague from College Ward, knows how important that is for her residents. It's also a connection to a D&D work campus. So those are all concerns. I know I'm kind of rattling off a whole bunch of stuff, but I'm heavily involved in this stuff. Stage 2 is huge. I want to know about curves in the track. That was a concern at the Herdman curve. And we've got curves in the one that is just at, as it rounds 1190 Richmond Road. That building is very concerned with noise and functionality of that curve. So I just want to know what is being done to make sure that that is not going to be noisy, problematic. So that's another question. Maybe I'll stop there.
So, Mr. Chair, just in response, I'll take the last point maybe to focus on. There are a couple of curves, and we did in stage 1. There was a straight section in the rock cut near Parkdale Avenue where we got some very good feedback about the mitigations and the effectiveness of those mitigations for noise. And so that particular curve near the end of Richmond, we are looking at putting rail dampers in place at that location. We are putting a noise wall at that location. We are trying to be very proactive in terms of ensuring we include noise mitigations on the system where we're very close to people. So there's a couple of sections. I know I've spoken in the past to Councillor Leeper about the section between Tunney's and Kitchissippi, putting in mitigations there. But then critically through Lincoln Fields, there's additional mitigations going in at that location. So we are very cognizant of those curves and the proximity of those curves to the homes. And we are trying to include as much as possible all the lessons learned from stage 1 and ensure that we have a solution out of the gate as opposed to after the fact. So we are tackling that. And then, separately, or just on the noise and the construction, we acknowledge and appreciate that we are very close to a number of homes, and we are trying to get that work done in an efficient, expedient fashion. In some cases, there are some areas where we've tried to close up the tunnel as quickly as possible just to basically kind of end the excavation adjacent to some apartments or getting to that point. Obviously, there's a couple of pinch points where the tunnel crosses Richmond to get into Byron Linear Park, and when it crosses again to get out. Those are kind of our 2 pinch points right now in terms of needing to get in, excavate, build the tunnel, and kind of restore the roadway. So that's a big focus for this year, and that's what we're going to try to kind of wrap up as quickly as possible over the next 18 months.
Okay, and connectivity for Moody. That I know it's not in stage 2 realm, but I think it's important that stage 2 works with the city on this, because this is really important on that overpass to get cycling and pedestrian infrastructure to get people from Bell's Corners to the station. So not everybody wants to use a bus all the time. If they can walk or cycle.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the connection between Moody Station and Bell's Corner has certainly gotten a lot of attention in the last few days. Obviously, we're in close contact with transportation planning and what solutions exist for that area. We are doing some, I would say, minor cleanup work on the bridges, but that's not it's not creating a full, separated or full multi-use pathway over that bridge. And so we're taking a light touch to it at this time. But I have been in regular conversations with VBG and the transportation planning group to see how do we scope out that project? How do we figure out what a funding solution and what's the timing for when that could potentially be a possibility for the group?
I appreciate it. It's extremely important, especially because it's the end of the line. And so you're going to have a lot of people using it coming from the south. to the station. I know it's a priority. I'll leave it there and I'll maybe come back after. I'll let my colleagues ask questions next. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just a couple of clarification questions. First off, in the east, you've noted that you are roughly 51 days, or they are 51 days late. Can you just remind me what was that? That's a less of a delay than you had thought previously. You've clawed back. Was it 13 days?
Yes, so the delay that we reported last month was 64 days. We've been able to claw back a little bit of that time to 51. And depending on how the testing goes, there may be further opportunities, because we are getting out early, I would say this year, with testing the boundary condition between Blair and the east, which is kind of a critical test point for us. There may be further opportunities, but right now I think what's on paper is the 51 days.
Okay. And can you tell me what is the work that has been successfully accelerated back to something close to the original schedule, if that's the right way to put it?
I think there, in the schedule, there's lots of kind of room and float in different areas. And so there's some adjustments and some optimizations of that work. And so there's some pressure points too. Pressure points that created the delay were laborers strike last year, railroad workers strike at the end of the year. So that's kind of what's created the delay for the contractor. So we have been working with them in terms of looking at the schedule, trying to optimize time, see if there's errors in this, not errors, but maybe kind of assumptions in the schedule that can be pulled back. So there's no specific work that we've accelerated at this point. It's really about optimizing the schedule as it stands in front of us today.
Does it involve more personnel on site doing the work, or
no? Right now we've got, roughly, a year and a half or year and 3/4, so there's a big block of time left. And so there's a, percentage error on that. There's a percentage fluctuation. It can go out, it can come back, and we pulled it back a little bit. And depending on the results of the testing, there may be an opportunity to pull it back further, but at this point we can't commit to anything.
Okay. And thanks. And I think I share Councillor Tierney's opinion. We want to know what those delays are, but we also don't want the system opened until it's ready. So I do understand. The 3-week trial running period in the east that you made mention of, is that the contractually required length of time, or can you give me some more color on that?
So in the run up to handover, the system does need to be fully complete, and then baked into the schedule, we've got 84 days allocated for training. And so there will be operators on the line operating trains between Trim and probably the Blair pocket track for those 84 days. They achieve substantial completion once the infrastructure is finished. Once the infrastructure is finished, it would be handed over, and then we would have a 3-week trial running period. Now that 3-week trial running period is largely to demonstrate to the maintainer of the system that the infrastructure has been designed and built in such a way that they won't be incurring reams of performance deductions, that it works. So that it's a different pressure point than in stage one. In stage one, it was meant to show that the global system works. In stage two, the 21, again, it's a contractual period, and the contract is required for the builder to demonstrate to the maintainer that the system works correctly. Obviously, we're a part of that. We want to see that it designed and built correctly too, but it's kind of the final performance test. And then once we've done that performance test, then we will then look at the system kind of globally and the timing and where we are with booking and operators, and then make a decision point about if we need additional time, or do we, when do we open? When does it make sense in terms of switching over all the bus routes, for example? When is the best timing for that?
And I think we're going to delve into that a bit more deeply in the next part of today's meeting, right, with respect to the delegated authorities. Because that's something that I think everyone around the table is very interested in, is that, go, no go decision, and how council is going to be kept abreast of progress, and where the balance is going to be between seeking council's advice and informing us as to how things are going. So we'll probably jump a bit more into that in the next report, I think, that you intend to provide today. So the August 1st date on line 2 is interesting. That's the first time anybody has given us a date, and I hope that doesn't get us into trouble. If on August 1st, you see a train is able to run from one end to the other, what does that imply with respect to timing for revenue service, accepting the first fare paying passengers?
I would say it doesn't. It's more about just kind of understanding the downside risk of, are we generally tracking to a program that will enable us to be successful for, October opening or October handover? If we're not at the point where we're running trains the full extent of the line by August 1st, then there's going to be a pressure on that schedule. There's no, it's more about measuring kind of the downside risk and understanding, are we achieving the progress we need at a 10,000 foot level? We still have teams like in the individual stations chasing occupancy and fire approvals and commissioning all the cameras, but just at the highest level, once you start seeing trains going to Bayview and from Bayview all the way to Linebank, that's kind of an indicator that we're on track.
And I think Councillor Brockington, we're just chatting. On track at this point means an October handover, which is roughly 30, to my mind, that's a month's difference from the last time council had an expectation of when the handover would be. Like, is that delay now increased by about 30 days or so?
I think previously we described the August-September timeframe as a bit of a stretch target, and the push to late September and into early October is really a function of wanting to make sure we blocked out as much time as possible for training prior to the handover process. And so that's probably the thing that's creating the pressure there, as opposed to specific technical delay. We've been in negotiation with the contractor in respect of their obligations to provide access for training for some time now.
Okay.
And we've just recently settled on what that will look like. And that's what's giving us the new timeline.
The schedule optimizations that you were able to achieve in the East End,
right.
Is there any reason we haven't been able to achieve similar schedule optimizations for line 2?
The East End, we're still dealing with 500 plus days, 600 days in turn. So there's more room to kind of move around. On the Trillium line, we're down, there's specific obligations, specific things they need to deliver over the coming months. Siemens needs to get in, training staff need to get in. We need to have access to the stations to do the end-to-end testing. There's no room to kind of adjust and make optimizations like that on the Trillium line.
Okay, so a function of the tighter timeframes. How many people are using R2 today? The train replacement line.
What is R2? Sorry for that.
So we have the train replacement bus, which runs from Bayview to Carleton, or does it go further? It goes all the way to South Keys. I'm wondering what passenger numbers are like on that.
Chair, I have Pat on mine. Maybe I know that we have 12 buses, but I don't know how many passengers do we have.
And Mr. Chair, I don't know either, but we can certainly find out what our current ridership levels are and let Councillor Leeper know. There's, when Carleton is normally in session, that's the busiest stop on the route. But so it's a primary way of getting to Carleton University, but obviously we're not carrying as many people on the line 2 replacement buses as we were on the train before closing, or as we expect to on the train once it reopens.
Okay. And I am interested in that number. Just those are the people who are being probably, for those who have stayed with us on transit and are using the R2, there's a significant number of them who are being impacted by delays to the train operator, the train handover, not to mention the people who have abandoned transit altogether during this period of construction. So I am interested in seeing those numbers. My final question, Chair, can you refresh my memory as to when we're expecting that report on progress towards achieving the inquiry recommendations?
So at this point, Mr. Chair, we would put it on the agenda for next month.
Next month.
Yeah, okay.
Chair, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Just on that last point, so this is the third-party review that we've agreed to undertake it. That's my understanding. So what was the question? What report was that? Ouais, j'ai pas entendu très bien là. Ça, c'est le rapport pour l'analyse indépendante qui.
That's the report on the independent analysis that was done. If I understood what was said, Councillor Leeper asked when we would get back to the report. And we said that in April for the subcommittee, we will be able to present something to you, to the subcommittee.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the O-Train West and a couple about O-Train South. On O-Train West, about the mobility and the bus detours. I know we're many months into those detours, but how does staff or are staff evaluating the travel times on the detours? Are they working as expected? Have there been any issues in terms of traffic congestion? The three spots in particular I'd be concerned about would be the Woodruff Iris detour, the Bayshore detour, and then Scott Street as well.
Chair, I will refer to Pat, please.
Thanks, Renee. Mr. Chair, the detours are working generally well. There have been, and generally very smoothly, there have been isolated occasions when there's been auto traffic backups in those areas that have caused delays to the bus service, which would not have been experienced if the buses were still running on the transitway. But there's not been any long-term durable problems with the operation of these detours.
Okay, thank you. And then on the south, I guess we are getting close to the finish line for the south. Are there any risks that you're tracking besides issues that may come up in testing, I suppose? Are there any other risks related to construction or otherwise that could put these timelines in jeopardy right now?
Mr. Chair, there are a whole list of risks that we track and progress and things that the team keeps the team up at night to monitor. And we need to see progress on stations. We need to see progress on the systems installation, so we are tracking those closely. And then, some of the activities need to go well. The signal testing when it starts, and I have no reason not to expect that it will go well. But if there are things that we find during the testing program that are a surprise or add time, those will be real and they will have a real impact. And so I wouldn't say there's one acute thing that it's like this one thing, if I fix that, then I can rest assured the program is going to be delivered. We're tracking everything on the project right now. And everything needs to go smoothly through the testing program to meet those timelines.
Okay, and with the progress in the south so far, what kind of trials or testing or evaluation with the trains has been done over the colder months and the winter months, or has there been any over the past few weeks and months there?
Yeah, they have the team has been running test trains between Hunt Club and Leitrim for some time over the winter period. So there has been some activity, as part of just kind of shaking out the performance of the vehicles. The next big test is really end-to-end on the system, but they have been being used. And at some point in the near future, we are bringing back the peer review that was engaged. And one of the comments, there were some comments about some specific tests that the peer reviewer made. And so we did undertake those tests. For example, there was a cold start test that was recommended. And we were fortunate to have fortunate to have a very cold day this winter. And we were able to use that time to essentially run down the batteries, make sure that the vehicle could restart in that cold temperature. Be it as a diesel vehicle. And so that test was passed and we did record the results of those tests. Generally, again, just running trains on that test track, and we'll expand that test track very, very soon.
Okay. I'm certainly hopeful that we can begin passenger service this fall on the Trillium line. Is there a point though, if we get too close to winter, where you might start looking at, would it be better to launch that in the new year? I guess I'm trying to get a sense for when you're evaluating when to plan out a launch date, how significant is winter. Does that make a difference in the timelines?
Chair, c'est sûr que nous, on est en train d'analyser effectivement.
Well,
est-ce que
we're trying to see if it's a good time to launch a train line around winter time. But we'll have to go through this. So what we decided is to go forward and make sure that the buses are still running in parallel. So this way, there's no pressure on the clientele service, and we are sure that we will be able to provide the service in normal conditions in Ottawa.
Well, yeah, a different approach then to certainly line one, and a different approach if it had been launched or if it's launched early in the fall. Okay. Thank you, Chair. I think that's it.
Thank you. I was going to go to Councillor Brockington. I'm a bit old school in that I try to get through the members first. And I would have, but Councillor Curry came on, and Councillor Brockington, I appreciate your patience with this. I know Councillor Curry has to leave at 11:30, so I'm going to go to Councillor Curry, and then I will go to you. And again, nothing personal. Thanks.
Thanks. And I'll be very quick, Councillor Brockington, as well. I really just wanted to highlight, because a lot of my questions were answered, that when we go to think about the report on this presentation, think about what would be in it. Really long presentation with a lot of detail. So when I think we're already discussing what it might look like going forward for these types of reports or presentations. But I'd like you to just try to think about that right now, Mr. Morgan, how much time it would take you to have done a report on this update that we would have gotten ahead of time. So just something to think about when we try to come up with a solution going forward. And I did want to say thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to go speak at an event in Canada that I've rebooked 3 times. When I'm done, I'll come back. Thank you very much.
Okay, merci, Conseiller Curry. Thanks again, Councillor Brockington, for your patience.
No worries, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks to staff, very detailed update. I appreciate the information and seeing the progress of our stations and bridges and other components of the line. Starting with the Trillium line as well, there was no update on the Rideau River pedestrian bridge, although the video had a quick clip of it. Could you please provide an update on this bridge, please?
Mr. Chair, in discussion with the builder, and I've spoken to some of the councillors recently about this bridge, their schedule shows end of July, but they are organizing to have it done by end of August. I've impressed upon them the desire from the community to have that early as soon as possible, and we will continue to do that. We are kind of counting on them to remobilize for all the remaining civil works on the project in the south in the coming weeks, and we'll continue to press for an earlier opening. But unfortunately, their obligation contractually is only to provide that bridge to the public at substantial completion. So we have been communicating with them to ask them to try to do something sooner. But as of now, the last update I got, which was different than an update I provided to you, Councillor, recently, they're saying August now.
Thank you for that. Mooney's Bay Station was not part of your presentation. Just, are there any issues that the committee needs to be made aware of with the station?
No issues with Mooney Bay. It's nearly complete. I think we're waiting for a final water connection and then commissioning the communication system.
Excellent. Okay. The Walkley multi-use pathway existed before construction on Walkley Station commenced. However, the plan is to extend the length of this pathway through other properties and ultimately, at the end of the day, all the way to Bank Street. Where will this current MUP end when it reopens?
Mr. Chair, I have to get with the local planner on that to confirm the developer's piece, because the developer is providing the cut-through connection. Our work on rebuilding it to meet the gradient standards for AODA is underway now, and I believe that it ends at roughly kind of near the end of the current platform. But I'll endeavor to get you a map and an overview of that after the session.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of components at play. The private development to the south is complete. The RioCan property between this property and Bank Street is ready to go, but the Bank Street redesign is not. So I'm just trying to get in my head when all these components are going to be ready. Not Hogsback, the Hunt Club Bridge has posed some challenges, engineering challenges during this entire process. Where are we with that bridge? And I have another sub questions with respect to road refurbishment, pedestrian crossings, just the quality of the road itself now is in, I'd say, poor shape. When will we see some upgrades to that, the immediate area under that bridge?
So, Mr. Chair, just to give an update on the Hunt Club Bridge first. So they spent the last 3 months kind of building up the approaches on either side. I understand over the coming weeks, they're going to pour the distribution slab, which is kind of the last step before they can then come and put the waterproofing and other things down. So they're getting very close to finishing that. Obviously, as I mentioned, it is an integrated structure. And so that structure will have both track and pedestrian connections on it. I expect that the pedestrian access and connection will be built as part of the completion of the project. So by substantial completion, in terms of the final finish of the roadway underneath, if there's been damage or other kind of consequences, we can take that away and do a review with both our partners in asset management, but also the construction team to see if we've caused some damage to that road in that specific area. I would expect that to be cleaned up.
Would you be able to commit now to at least have a look at the road? It's going to be a number of months before this project is complete, the bridge and the crossings. For the volume of traffic that uses this road, I'm saying the quality is quite poor. Could you just commit to take a look at it?
Yes.
And if you deem it needs some immediate TLC, then I'll leave that with you. But I'm saying the road is in pretty bad shape here.
Okay, we will take that away and have a look.
Thank
and
you.
We'll get back to you.
I appreciate that very much. Can you give us some comfort on how testing will change for this line compared to line 1? What did we learn from line 1 testing the entire experience that will modify our testing schedule for the better for line 2 when Trillium opens, when the East End opens, West End?
Mr. Chair, I think, starting with the simplest answer, which is we've extended the duration of the trial running period. We've added specific performance criteria into the contract for the trial running period. So those are kind of two, I would say, two major changes that we've made over stage 1. The other, I would say, difference with the projects is that with the Trillium line, we have 6 vehicles that we used for 3 or 4 years. And so we are making some changes to those vehicles in terms of adding different signaling equipment. So that needs to be tested. But other than the signaling equipment, we're quite comfortable with the performance of those trains. And so we're starting with a group of 6 trains that we're quite happy with, that we're quite comfortable that the performance is there and that they're working reliably out of the gate. Separately, we purchased 7 Stadler vehicles. And those vehicles came directly from the manufacturing facility in Europe. They have proven to be very, based on our initial inspections and initial use of those vehicles kind of right out of the gate, they've been very reliable. They've worked very well. And so we've had very good success whenever we've gotten vehicles from I'll call it the home factory. So we're starting with a fleet that is, I would say, very mature in terms of its design. Half the fleet is already mature in terms of its use and our experience with it. So we're taking that's a much different starting point than stage 1, where we were building the fleet here. We were it was a design that was being developed. We're working out the bugs as we went. Now our starting point is we've had 13 vehicles on site for over a year in essentially their final state. So that's a very good starting point. And then in terms of the track configuration, the design of the system, our baseline is a configuration that worked for 20 years. We're not making any fundamental changes to the track design because it worked for so many years. And so there are new things that we need to test out. We're going to go to the Siemens switch machines, so that's new. But we're going back to the Hovey gas heaters. So those, so there's kind of elements that are new that we need to really test and focus. But then there's many elements that we're relying on that were service proven in Ottawa by our team for a number of years. And so it's kind of a different starting point.
Excellent. I'll just add, as someone who took the Trillium line since the day it opened, it was the most reliable public transit I've ever relied on. It was the workhorse. I'm going to call the 95 the workhorse. Bus route 95 was the workhorse of OC Transpo. But as far as reliability, working at Tunney's Pasture, if I needed to be there at 8:30, I got there at 8:30. Trillium line was very dependable and reliable, and I hope that contains or continues when the track reopens. And I don't want anyone here to think, leaving here today, that we only test for those 3 weeks once we get the handover, because that is like the most false understanding anyone can have, that the length of time that the carriages and infrastructure are tested is extensive. 3 weeks is sort of the last chapter of a long book of testing that these trains go through. And I think we should, as a takeaway, think about how we're going to communicate to the public, who are very keen to understand that we are going to go all out on testing, so that when the first passenger comes on these trains, we can demonstrate, no, it just wasn't 3 weeks. We put these trains through a real rigmarole, and we're very confident that they've passed all of these testing components.
Mr. Chair, if I may, this is a good point that Councillor Brockington brought. So we are working now with my communications department to make sure that we will build a kind of buzz, I would say, to educate customers and on the test that we have done and the test that we will do, and all the steps will be followed, and we'll try to effectively convince people that we didn't run those trains only 21 or 23 days. They have been running for a while now, and we will continue on that. So we will come with the communication plan on that for sure.
Excellent. And thanks again, Chair. My last question is just on the frequency of our team's meetings with the contractors, where we're getting progress updates. Are those meetings scheduled meetings weekly, bi-weekly? What's the frequency that you are getting feedback that milestones are being reached, progress is being made, you go through stations? How does that happen? Can you just explain that?
Of course, Mr. Chair, we have a construction team that's co-located with the contractor in the field. So they're based out of site trailers in various locations. That construction team they're on site on a daily basis, and they're meeting with the contractor on a daily basis in terms of tracking issues, unblocking roadblocks, trying to troubleshoot things that arise either from the community or with construction itself. So the contracting team is meeting with the construction team on a daily basis. I'm meeting with them on a weekly basis to go through roadblocks and challenges and escalated issues. But I know that, reporting to me, we have a design team covering utilities, track design, you name it, vehicle design, that they're meeting with them also on a weekly basis. And so the range right now is weekly or daily to weekly. And then we have some additional check-in points, some reporting required from them on a monthly basis. So we're on the project all the time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Brockington, and some good comments in terms of the testing and exploring sort of the broader work that's being done in that area outside of the 3 weeks. And I agree with his points on making sure that we have a very strong messaging in that area. I was in Findlay Creek last night at a community meeting and heard from our residents, hey, let's learn from phase one. Let's not go through that similar experience. So I appreciate that you've indicated that we're taking the lessons from that we're at a different starting point, that there's not a perception that that there's some testings beyond the 3 weeks that you've outlined here. I'm also interested in the Hunt Club lane closures that you have on one of your slides here. You have fall 2022 to winter 2023. Obviously, that's a pinch point for the community, a very busy arterial road. Right? Is there delays? Is there restrictions here for that entire period, or is it going to be periodic? What does that look like? And I know you've committed to obviously communicating to the public well in advance when we'll see that, but that's a pretty busy stretch though. So what can we expect if you could just get into a little more detail there, please?
Mr. Chair, I can follow up with some additional detail and probably like 6-month look ahead. But at this point, the bridge is largely complete. So to the extent that they need to do activity that may overhang the roadway, they would want to close those intersections. To the extent that they want to restore some of, we put in 2 new center columns into the roadway. To the extent that they need to kind of restore the original condition, repave it, we would need to close the roads for that. So I think it's, as opposed to kind of a mass closure, or it's more of those rolling closures that we expect to see to kind of restore, to finish off some works on the bridge overhead, and then to restore the lanes underneath to their original configuration.
Thank you. Just moving on, in your memorandum that you sent to council on the 13th of March, which was of course made available as well to the public, you talked about the timelines and the updated timelines for the south and the east and the west. And can you just confirm there's nothing in this presentation today that you didn't have in that presentation, right? The timelines are consistent, or is there new timelines that we're getting today?
There's really just the shortening of by 13 days on the east. And so I think that memo said the original 64 days. So there's a slight shortening of the time. And then we're probably feeling a little stronger about more of an end of September. Whereas previously we were a bit hedging a little bit in terms of making August, September a stretch target. Now we're kind of in a stronger position knowing that it's more likely the end of September.
Okay. And just on slide 64, and again, just because there's so much interest in this project across the city, the south end is going to go along online prior to the other sections of stage 2. On slide 64, you give the scheduled update, and you have trial running and the trial operations and the passenger service. And I know we're going to get greater detail on that as we get closer to that. Can you just speak to what's the overlap in terms of August and September? What is that? What is that going to look like for you in terms of the work you're doing and shifting over to getting closer to being open for passenger service? Again, it's a point that I think a lot of people are interested in. So you did mention it, and I'm going to belabor the point. Thanks.
Okay. So through through September, we need to finish the training and complete as much training as possible to get our operators, so drivers on the train, as well as our rail control staff in the control room, to a point where their proficiency level as tested by the training department and the number of hours as required by the training department have been met. And, in order to get started on that training in a way that we're comfortable with, we need to give those individuals access to the entire system end to end. So starting in kind of beginning of August, they need to be able to use the system in a way that represents or reflects how the system would be used by them when they're in service. And so we need to get the system to a maturity level where we're comfortable that the training hours really reflect what's going to be their experience running that network, save and except for passengers, obviously, but we need to get them to that point. And so really focused on getting the training staff and the individuals trained to a point where they're all comfortable with operating system. There's no questions. They know how to do diversions. They know how to do recover doors, all of those things. So we need to get them to that point. Once that's done, then we can start a test period, the trial running, where we say to the contractor, okay, we're going to not stop training, but we're no longer going to do exercises. We're no longer going to allow the system to have, closures or whatever, because we want to stop. Okay, we're going to stop the system for an hour, do some training, give everybody a break, and then start training again. Once we move into trial running, it's really about, now we're going to run the 18 hours a day. We're going to do a mock service, and overnight, we're going to, trains have to be cleaned, they have to be inspected, they have to be refueled, resand, and all additional fluids put back into service. Then you go into kind of that test period. all of that, you know, we need to see positive results out of all of those things. We need to see good outcomes. And Renee previously had committed to, once we enter the trial running period, she would give you a daily update on that information. But if we get into August and we start seeing that there's challenges, then that's going to, you know, we're going to say we need more time. If we get into August and things are going very well, and there's a good uptake on proficiency by the operators, good uptake by the rail controllers, then we'll be in a much more comfortable position to come to committee and recommend, you know, next steps on what we would do. And so it's a bit fluid, you know, and it's not precise, and there's no, you know, I have that one August 1st date as kind of in my mind, that's what I'm watching for. But, you know, to the extent that the program over the summer, that August through September, is successful, and we see that the trains are reliable, that we see that the operation training is going well, then we'd be ready to move into the trial running period. And even then, you know, we need to be successful through the trial running period. And even then, we still need to come back and say, is now the right time, depending on where that final date lands us. And so we really do want to take our time with that period, and which is why you see a bit of vagueness in terms of, you know, the transition from activity to activity. Because as we go, we need to measure, and our confidence has to be high before we get to the next step.
Thank you for that. A few months ago, when we were dealing with the terms of reference, we had a delegation. They talked about the choice of tiles, floor tiles, and the slipperiness of them. And I kept wanting to bring it back when we have this meeting. And I don't know if you can speak to it. It's a pretty granular detail, but my own observation is whether it be retail places and that, the tiles, when they get wet, seem to be slippery. And I just wonder if, you know, what do we have in terms of kind of flooring that you know, ensures the safety of the people going in there when it gets wet, given the winter,
Mr. Chair,
wet season that we have.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, what we saw in stage one is that there are a few stage one locations where the entrance to the station didn't have a lot of weather protection. And so you were basically going from immediately outside in the snow to immediately indoors. And in those locations, it was, you know, the tiles were slippery. And you know, I would say that there was some slowness in terms of responding to that, putting down floor mats and other things that kind of are typical practice for areas like that in Ottawa. At the same time, we looked at that and said, are the tiles actually slippery when they're wet? And can we make a change to the specification for stage two? And so that is one of the changes that we've made. And so we've increased the requirement for, it's not necessarily the tiles per se, but, you know, for the floor and the entrance areas, when you're going from the outdoors to the indoors, you know, you need a certain amount of friction on the floor surface to prevent you from slipping. So we have made a change in stage two in terms of that specific detail. But then again, on stage one, they did apply coating. They have been more aggressive with the use of mats. We have seen the complaints regarding that particular issue go way down.
Thank you for the answer. I don't see any further questions from members or from councillors. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Leeper, apologize. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll ask it now rather than waiting for the next report, but we keep talking about the trial period. So for 84 days, our staff are training and the maintainers are training. And at some point, the decision is made, you know, everything is going well. We're going to go into the 3-week trial running period, which is a much more rigorous, I want to call it simulated train service. And you can let me know if that's not accurate. You've spoken a couple of times about success, and you spoke a couple of times about measuring to see how things are going. Can you tell us more about what are you measuring during those 3 weeks? What are those criteria that you've added that you spoke to Councillor Brockington about? And what does success actually mean? And how objective and how quantifiable is that? And what are you going to tell we and the public about how it's going?
Mr. Chair, so just to kind of split out a couple ideas, the 84 days is related to the training requirements on the east and the west. So if I come back to the trial running requirements for Trillium Line, so there's a 21-day period that's set aside for trial running. 7 days is set aside for operational exercises to prove that diversions and different things work. And there's a requirement for over a 14-day period for the system to achieve a availability of 98.5%. So basically a rolling average of 98.5. In order to achieve that, you basically have to be running at, you can't have any really bad days because you won't be able to meet the average, and you need to continue that service until you make that average. I think that there is we did provide a memo last year, I believe, that kind of provided the nitty details of the trial running requirements. So we can recirculate that to the committee because it does. So that would be the number we're measuring. When we get into that trial running period, the precise number, it would be 98.5. There's some other kind of secondary requirements as well that would be monitoring and wanting to be sure, like it's 98.5 with dirty trains, it doesn't really it's not meeting the objectives of what we're trying to do. But there's kind of some subjective things that we'll be looking at, but the objective measure is the 98.5 for the Trillium line. So, and there's a different approach for East Confederation line. But I think for now, what we'll try to do is provide you kind of detailed information on what we're doing for the Trillium line, what the objective measures are, how we'd be doing that, the setup of the committee. And then one of the recommendations from the public inquiry was to have somebody, independent third party, objectively assess that 98.5. And so we're looking at that now. Who's best placed to do that, and who could then, come and present to you that the 98.5 was achieved.
Okay. Sorry, please, Madam McCall.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I want to maybe to let you know that we'll come in May. We'll have a deep dive on the Trillium line because, as we said, it's coming, and we'll be fully transparent with you for sure. And we'll bring those KPIs to you, and we'll explain how I will be accountable to the subcommittee to make sure that when we will take the decision, it will be our decision. It's not only OC Transpo's decision.
Sure, I'm happy to wait until May to continue this conversation. Thank you.
For sure, Councillor. Yeah, and it's an important one, as you and I have discussed, and we'll continue that conversation. But I think we'll end the conversation today. I don't see any other speakers there, so I'm thankful for all the questions from members and Councillor Brockington, who's here, and other councillors who've tuned in. Thank you, staff, for that. We'll now move on to the next agenda item, which is the City Manager's Office, City Manager's Delegated Authority with respect to Stage 1 and Stage 2. There was a report that was distributed in advance. Thank you. And I understand that we will have a presentation today to walk us through this. Obviously, the background of this was, I think, interest from all of us on the delegated authorities that exist, and understanding that a little better. So the report today is one for information for us. So I'll turn it over to staff. I see Sharon is here, I think, to lead this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair DeRoche. Good morning, everyone. Tout le monde. And thank you to Councillor Menard as well for providing the direction that allows us to have this really important conversation today. I wanted to take a moment this morning to provide some context on delegated authority with respect to Stage 1 and Stage 2 light rail transit before Sharon walks you through the details. Over the years, Council and the city have implemented important mechanisms to strengthen transparency and accountability within the organization, including the delegation of powers policy, which was approved by Council in 2007. The purpose of this policy is to provide clear guidance and ensure appropriate accountability and reporting whenever delegated authority is exercised. I want to reinforce that this transparency mechanism is of paramount importance, not only to the senior leadership team, but to the entire organization, with each department outlining their use of delegated authority over the previous year in annual reports. When Council approved the LRT Stage 1 and Stage 2 in 2012 and 2019, respectively, the reports laid out specific project delegated authorities with explicit terms and conditions, and we have regularly reported back on their use in accordance with these terms and conditions, and also supplemented them through various channels. During the project, staff needed to negotiate and execute agreements with many external stakeholders, including funding contribution agreements with both the federal and the provincial governments, as well as land agreements with the NCC, the University of Ottawa, Carleton Algonquin, Hydro Ottawa, and VO Rail. And delegated authority was given by council to conclude these matters. Other authorities were required to facilitate the construction, including agreements related to station integrations, utility works, and real estate transactions. And they're all within the approved budget. Council also delegated authority to give effect to the approved budget and funding sources, including the contingency fund. On a large multi-year project, there's unforeseen costs and variations, and 2 groups were created to review all the proposed changes and draws from the contingency fund to properly manage the risks and the cost changes. Building Ottawa's LRT system is an extremely complex project with many moving pieces, and this delegation of authority was required to ensure operational decisions were carried out efficiently and within a reasonable time frame. Through the LRT public inquiry and discussions at this subcommittee and council, we have heard loud and clear that there is a strong desire to enhance reporting to council on our delegated authority. This is something that Renee's team is incorporating into their action plan to respond to the inquiry's recommendations. And I want to assure you that we're taking the lessons from the public inquiry to heart and that we are committed to continuously improving the mechanisms and processes that we have in place to demonstrate to the public that their municipal government is trustworthy and transparent. On that note, I'm going to pass things over to Renee.
Thank you, Chair, and I will pass things over to Sharon Vogel.
Thanks very much. And thanks, Mr. Chair, for inviting me to Ottawa to deliver this presentation on delegated authority. It was terrific to see the presentation of how construction on stage 2 and the extension of the Trillium line is progressing. I'm particularly excited about that airport extension for these trips to Ottawa. So my presentation today, my partner, Catherine Gleason-Mercier, I'd like to thank her for her assistance in the preparation of this presentation, and she'll manage the slide deck as we go through. My presentation this morning is about half an hour, and it covers the following 3 topics. First, what is delegated authority and when is it used? Second, what are typical exercises of delegated authority on construction projects generally? And then thirdly, how is delegated authority used for the stage 1 and stage 2 projects? So in relation to my presentation today, as I understand it, the impetus for this presentation was the motion which passed at the LRT subcommittee that was held on February 16, and the relevant provisions of that motion are set out on this slide. And as the interim city manager indicated, there has been a report on the delegated authority that had been delegated in relation to stage 1 and stage 2. And the second element of the motion that's important is the importance of this subcommittee receiving regular updates on the delegated authority from the interim city manager with respect to stage 1 and stage 2. So that sets the stage for this presentation today. In terms of answering the question, what is delegated authority? In Ontario, council derives its power from the Municipal Act. The powers of a municipality are exercised by its council, and council's role is described in the Municipal Act as you all know, as including things like developing and evaluating the policies and programs of the municipality, ensuring that administrative policies, practices, and procedures are in place to implement the decisions of council, and ensuring the accountability and transparency of the operations of the municipality and the activities of senior management of the municipality. Under the Municipal Act, council can delegate its powers to a person or body subject to the restrictions under the Act. And there are certain powers that can't be delegated, for example, legislative and quasi-judicial functions. But council can delegate administrative or operational responsibility to an individual, a department, or a committee of council. This is necessary so as to allow staff of a municipality to exercise their professional judgment based on their education, their qualifications, and their experience. So the City of Ottawa, like every other municipality in the province, uses delegation of authority regularly and has a general delegation of authority bylaw for routine delegations that requires that sub-delegations be recorded in writing. So to turn now to look at when is authority delegated. As noted by the Ontario Court of Appeal, quoting a textbook in its decision in a case called Jackson and the City of Vaughan, the Court of Appeal noted that one of the purposes of conferring broad powers of delegation is to permit a municipal council to delegate powers and authority to a person or body that is, in the view of the council, better able to deal with or handle issues or matters given the person or body's expertise, qualifications, or background. And by way of example, engineering expertise can come into play, particularly in relation to a construction project. Now, council typically delegates authority for day-to-day decisions in a variety of areas of responsibility. And in large cities, there are often extensive delegations of authority as a result of the number of decisions which need to be made on a daily basis. Some of you may recall the Bellamy Report. The Bellamy Report dealt with the City of Toronto's computer leasing and other contracts. The report of Justice Bellamy was released in 2005. And it made a number of really important recommendations in respect of the delegation of authority. One of these, recommendation 73, stated that council should delegate the administrative day-to-day operations of the city to staff and concentrate on matters of policy. Another recommendation of the Bellamy Report was that council consider ways to enhance its effectiveness as a deliberative leadership body. And I think that that's a useful and helpful articulation of council's role as a deliberative leadership body. So where authority has been delegated, it is the responsibility of city staff to implement council's decisions and then report appropriately. In terms of the types of delegated authority that are typical, the Bellamy Report sets out a list of the types of activities that a municipal council might decide to delegate. And I won't read all of those listed on this slide, but things like awarding contracts, coordinating committee agendas and work plans, supervising the city manager and senior staff, providing direction to the administration are the types of things that are referenced in the Bellamy Report. So to turn now to the typical exercises of delegated authority on a construction project. At the outset of a construction project, it is very typical for delegated authority to be given to staff so as to manage day-to-day design and construction activities. Change orders or variations will be issued over the course of a project as changes arise in the ordinary course. It's inevitable. And it's typical for staff to handle these types of issues. And there can be hundreds of variations or change orders on your average construction project. There will be reports to council in accordance with the delegated authority as significant events occur. But it is important to recognize that in order for staff to be able to do their jobs, delegation of authority is necessary in both the construction and the maintenance phases of a construction project. For example, if a safety issue arises and a temporary speed restriction, or even a stoppage of the line needs to be implemented, a decision needs to be made right away by staff. And of course, at the other end of the spectrum, the nitty-gritty of daily variations in change orders, clearing out roadblocks, needs to be made at the staff level. Otherwise, it's very difficult for the construction project to proceed appropriately without delays. Now, of course, if there are significant disputes, council will be informed of such disputes. If a dispute gets to the stage where litigation is contemplated, then council will be informed and advised on a privileged and confidential basis. As staff indicated earlier, staff are making efforts to incorporate the recommendations of the Ottawa Public Inquiry Commission. And recommendation 60 of that commission report referenced the decision-making and information sharing by city staff about project implementation, and the fact that it must always accord with the terms of any delegation of authority and other governing council resolutions. It's important to recognize that the commission did not find that there was anything wrong with the delegation of authority on stage one. Rather, it found that the delegation of authority was not used in accordance with the 2012 bylaw, particularly in the summer of 2019, and it was critical of what it characterized as a small working group and their activities in that summer. The commission report noted more generally in the procurement section of the report that it is a matter of finding an appropriate balance between authority delegated to professional staff to make operational decisions without political interference and appropriate political oversight and accountability for strategic decisions and outcomes. And I think that that is a good articulation of the balancing exercise that goes on. Similar delegations of authority have taken place on other Canadian municipal projects, including light rail transit projects. If we look, for example, at the region of Waterloo's light rail transit project, there was a very broad delegation of authority to staff to finalize and execute the project agreement in that case. And the wording of that delegation of authority was to do all things as may be necessary or required to give effect to the project agreement. Similarly, the City of Calgary, in relation to their light rail transit project, they created a board with the city manager as a member to deliver the program. And on that board, neither the mayor nor any councillor sits on that board. So those are just some more recent examples of similar types of delegation of authority on other light rail transit projects. But let's look first at the stage one Confederation Line project. On this first slide, you'll see a contractual matrix that will be very familiar to many of you. This is the basic contractual structure of stage one. You see RTG as the project co, under it, a construction contractor, OLRTC, and a maintenance contractor, RTM. Now, the day-to-day management of the relationship between the city and RTG is handled by city staff. In terms of how that works in relation to delegation of authority, back in 2011, a project charter was created for stage one LRT project, and it includes reference to project governance. In terms of authority for decision-making on stage one, the path moves from the director of the Rail Implementation Office to what was then the deputy city manager to the city manager, then to FEDCO and council. The rail implementation office was of course focused on project implementation. Now the project charter also includes a description of roles and responsibilities and an approval assignment matrix, which indicates what decisions require FEDCO and council approval. For example, the MOU with Infrastructure Ontario, the capital and operating budget, and the functional design all required council approval. Detailed design and construction management approval lies with the rail implementation office, with updates for information purposes being provided to council in accordance with the project charter. Now, in addition to FEDCO and council, an executive steering committee was established for stage 1. The ESC's focus was on corporate strategy, and that entity reported on a quarterly basis to FEDCO and council. The members of the ESC are the city manager, the director of the rail implementation office, the city solicitor, the city treasurer, the general manager of transit services, and for a period of time, a representative of Infrastructure Ontario. As described by the interim city manager, there was also a contingency management committee, which was established to review and approve draws from the contingency fund. And finally, there was a change control board established as part of the scope change management process, so as to review all proposed changes, including variations, of course, which required funding from the contingency fund. So on December 19, 2012, council voted to delegate to the city manager the authority to negotiate, approve, execute, deliver, amend, and extend the project agreement and the ancillary agreements. In 2018, that delegation of authority was further delegated by the city manager to any general manager or director of the city. And where that delegation occurs, there could be a further delegation to city staff. Now, this is a broad delegation of authority. Delivery of the project agreement necessarily captures a wide range of decisions related to the day-to-day of the project, and it reflects project governance and the project governance and approval assignment matrix from the project charter. The purpose of that delegation of authority is to allow city staff to make necessary operational decisions, and those decisions include things like variations in respective change work on the project, changes to service levels, and implementing operational restrictions where necessary. Again, as I said earlier, necessary for city staff to properly do their job. Where decisions are wider reaching or rise to the level of changing the risk profile or the terms of the project agreement, staff do bring those decisions to council. In terms of reporting under the delegated authority, as part of that exercise of that delegated authority, the city manager and city staff regularly report back to council and councillors through the following channels of communication: quarterly memos to council, quarterly presentations to FEDCO, and now this body, memos on project progress and project milestones, memos on external appointments for oversight, and audits and third-party reviews. And as described earlier by the interim city manager, these reports have been delivered. To move now to discuss briefly stage 2, the Confederation Line extension and the Trillium Line extension. On this first slide, you'll see a contractual matrix of the Confederation Line extension with the project co on that element of that stage 2 project being Kiewit, Eurovia, and Vinci. And then in relation to the Trillium Line extension, the structure of that project agreement and the underlying contracts is shown on this slide, with T-Next being shown as the project co. So in relation to an overview of the Confederation Line extension and Trillium Line extension projects, the stage 2 Confederation Line LRT project is administered, as you know, through a design build finance contract, which was entered into between the city and EWC back April 24, 2019. And RTG, the maintainer for stage 1, will maintain the entire Confederation line. The stage 2 Trillium Extension LRT project is administered by a design build finance maintain contract, which was entered into between the city and TNEX on March 28, 2019. And as you well know, both projects are currently in the design and construction phase, and you've had an update on that today. In terms of the delegation of authority and reporting to council and councillors in relation to those projects, on March 6, 2019, council voted to delegate authority to the city manager to negotiate, finalize, execute, deliver, amend, and extend the Trillium Line Extension and Confederation Line Extension project agreements and associated ancillary agreements. On March 27, 2019, this delegation of authority was further delegated by the city manager to any general manager or director of the city. And where this delegation occurs, then there could be a further delegation to city staff in the applicable department or branch. So again, what this does is allow city staff to make the necessary day-to-day operational decisions on the projects. However, where decisions rise to the level of changing the risk profile or the terms of the project agreement, then staff bring those decisions to council. As part of the exercise of delegated authority, the city manager and city staff regularly report back to council and councillors, including the quarterly memo updates to council, regular updates to FEDCO, and now the LRT subcommittee, and results from audits and third-party reviews. So that is a quick summary of the delegated authority and how it's working in relation to stage 1 and stage 2. Be happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay, I don't see any members of the committee. Councillor Bernard has his hand up and moved it originally. So Councillor Bernard.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Chair, can you hear me okay now? I've got my headphones in.
Not bad, not bad. Yeah, I think project your voice as you well. Thanks.
I'll do that. Thank you very much for the report. That is helpful, and appreciate the report back from staff as a result of the motion. I think the point of the discussion we had previously was not to change the operational day-to-day issues, but on the issues that resulted previously in, I guess, what you could characterize as safety concerns for our residents. And those are some of the big decisions that we're going to have to make on stage 2. And so I wanted to just stay there for a moment, because you mentioned the decisions of that nature coming back to council if there's a changing of the risk profile. And I guess the question would be, did staff consider in the past the lowering of the testing criteria and the decision to change the testing criteria to be would that be considered in the future to be a changing of the risk profile? Would that sort of thing come back to council if those same decisions were being made today based on the definitions you provided for delegation of authority?
In terms of the testing criteria, I believe that city staff in the earlier presentation already indicated that they do intend to discuss the testing criteria with the subcommittee in advance of the testing criteria that would be applied during trial running being applied. And also they intend to report regularly over the course of the trial running period.
I appreciate the regular reporting. I guess the question is more specific around council's authority to make those decisions. I don't know that a reporting mechanism, if we're to change the testing criteria, is enough. I think that's an approval for city council. Is that not correct? If we were to change any of the testing criteria, that would come back for approval to us, as it could represent a risk.
In terms of the testing criteria and how they're set through the exercise of professional engineering judgment in terms of the expertise of city staff working with the construction contractor to have the ability to assess what testing criteria are appropriate and make sense in the circumstances. I believe what has been discussed is, and I will invite Ms. Amilcar to comment on this, but I believe that the understanding is that city staff will bring those testing criteria to council.
Chair, this is exactly what I said to Councillor Leeper just a few minutes ago. So in May, we'll come and we'll make a deep dive on the Trillium line. So councillors will be able to ask any questions and we'll explain how we will deal with those days, and we'll have KPIs for sure. So I think it's the best way to deal with those issues is to measure what we are doing, and it will be our responsibility to provide some recommendation to council, and if councillors reject them, we'll tell them what will be the consequences. One of the example that I can give now, and I think Michael said it earlier. So we said three weeks trial, but for sure it could be 5, 6, 7 weeks. It will depend on what we will find, what kind of problems, etc. And the trainer will need to be ready as well. The trainees will need to be ready. There is a lot of daily decision that can affect that frame. So I think the best way to have a transparent communication will be what I said. We'll come to you, we'll present to you what we are doing, and when we'll start the official trial, daily will let you know where we are on our KPIs. And if we have to change something, let's say after 10 days, we'll ask for a special counsel if you need it. We are an open book. We don't have any reason to hide information or something like that. And we have learned about the public inquiry report as well. And for me, it's easier to work like that sincerely, because I don't take any risk on my shoulder anymore. So I will bring them to you, but it is my responsibility as well to recommend you what we should do, because I'm working with experts who know better than I what we should do. And at the end of the day, if you said no, I will tell you what will be the consequence. And if you direct us to do something that I think we shouldn't, I will refuse.
Chair, I appreciate those comments from Madame Amilcar, and I also appreciate the comments from the acting city manager that they're taking these issues seriously. And I think that's what we're trying to get at, is that report, the commission report, and how we move forward to reduce our risks, to ensure resident safety, and make sure that we've got a well-functioning transit system in the future. And I guess on that score, we heard the report talk about the decision to lower the testing criteria as being misleading of council, and that there was non-disclosure of vital information, or Justice Horgan called it outright misrepresentation. And so I guess the question is, would staff suggest any changes to the delegation of authority that is currently existing to respond to the commission's report, or are there no changes being suggested at this time?
I will switch to French, so be prepared.
Français. Well, it's really important that we have all delegation of authority that's required. The last thing I want to do as a general manager is always asking myself, should I consult counsel on this all the time? I can use my judgment. I understand what happened in the past. I think it was been said often. It's the present and the future that will prove us right. But I need to be able to work freely. I need all the latitude necessary to make decisions. That's why you're paying me. That's why you have experts present. And it is my duty to be accountable, but I need all delegation of authority required to make daily decisions and not having to wonder all the time, should I wait? Should I wait? Because waiting has a cost. And waiting it takes away all the proactive side and the relevant side of our work. You can't imagine in the course of the day how many decisions we're making. Just try and put yourself in my shoes. If every time I must make a decision, I must wonder, should I ask counsel for this? No, I would have a big problem. I couldn't do the work you're paying me for. And this is what I commit to today, is to present to you as much information as possible based on my judgment and all the reports that we have seen with phase one. As I said earlier, for me, it's a blessing that we can bring you as much information as possible so that everybody is aware, and then the decisions to be taken will be taken collectively and not only by staff.
Well, merci beaucoup. Thank you for that, Chair. I hope that we do see that material change. Oh, sorry. Hope we do see that material change that we're hearing now from staff, that there is going to be a change in the way that this is approached, and that these decisions will come back to council where warranted and where there's a change in the risk profile. So appreciate those comments, and I hope my colleagues ask other questions on the same topic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for raising those questions. I think we're all on the same page in terms of the expectations going into the testing and the information that we'll want to see. And I think Renee did respond, and I'm sure we'll have some other questions on this subject. Go with Councillor Gower, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation. That quote you had from the Bellamy report, council should delegate the administrative day-to-day operations of the city to staff and concentrate on matters of policy. I haven't read the Bellamy report. I know it was about a procurement issue with IT. Why was that a point that the commission wanted to make? What is there a risk if is there a risk that he was trying to get at if we're not focused enough on policy and we get too into the weeds of day-to-day operations? What's the context there?
Yes, it was a concern that Justice Bellamy had in relation to risks of political interference, by way of example, that I referred to in relation to the other quote I read from her report. That Mr. Chair, she describes the role of council as a deliberative leadership body. So as a deliberative leadership body, council needs to have the appropriate information in front of them to make decisions at the right level, the strategic level, based on good information that it receives from its knowledgeable staff and sometimes external experts that have training, experience, qualifications, including in relation to some pretty complex issues, whether on the legal front, it be in relation to in respect of issues that were subject of the Bellamy report, which was computer leasing issues, in terms of expertise and understanding appropriate procurement methodology, by way of example. In the context of a construction project, those with expertise who can provide advice, whether they be staff or external experts, on things like the reasons why engineering judgment was exercised to reach a particular conclusion about what was appropriate or advisable in a particular fact-specific circumstance. And councillors, would not have that level of expertise to be able to take the decisions on the operational level. But councillors, in terms of being that deliberative leadership body, and with a strategic mindset, being able to take decisions based on good information. That's the message I took from the Bellamy report. It is still publicly available online, even though it was 2005. So I think it's an interesting report to read.
Okay, yeah, it's an issue that I think we struggle with often as councillors. Well, there's a great great line I remember about board governance. The board should keep their noses in, but their fingers out. And I think it speaks exactly that idea. It's policy and strategy as opposed to operations. And it's very difficult for us in our roles as counselors, because at the same time that we sit around a council table, we're all here today dealing with very hands-on issues in our wards, and we see things. And so it's hard sometimes for us to separate those two roles, but it is something we have to be cognizant of and make sure we're playing the right role when we're around a council table or a committee table, or trusting staff or delegating authority to staff on issues of procurement and operations and construction. I think timeliness is a big concern for me as we go forward in the next few months, as with stage 2 light rail and other projects at the city, about how quickly we get that information. Obviously, if there are issues that arise, it's important that we know about it as soon as possible so we can make the appropriate decisions. And I think, well, for me, thinking yesterday, we had a community services meeting and there was a regular report on delegation of authority that involved tens of millions of dollars of projects that was done perfectly, perfectly within delegated authority by staff. It passed without any comment. I wonder how many councillors even read that report. I think all of this discussion that we're having around the experience from the light rail in the previous term, I think is going to inform us as councillors, and we're going to be putting a lot more scrutiny into these routine reports that often are just, more administrative, not something we really deliberate. Sometimes we don't even read, but obviously they're very important. And if we're asking staff to keep us informed in a timely way, we also need to take the responsibility as councillors to make sure we're reading those reports and asking the appropriate questions when we have them to staff. So this will be an ongoing focus of this committee and city council over this term. And thank you for the presentation and information today.
Some good comments. Thank you. I don't think there's a question there. Councillor Kavanagh, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Ms. Vogel, for your presentation. Always informative. Thank you. I have to ask a very basic question, in terms of how the public views this. The concerns I see in the inquiry were the fact that the delegation of authority was accepted, and where it fell apart was the trial runs. And the issue was the mayor's office was informed, and specifically the transit chair was informed, but no one else. You haven't talked, when you talk about the delegation of authority, what is the role of the mayor's office? And is it lumped in with council? So that, that was the differential, is the fact that it was 2 levels. And I think that's where the problem was. So there's those that knew and those that didn't. And how do we fix that specifically in these definitions?
So I think that your question relates to the commission's findings, where I think you're right. The commission didn't find that there was anything wrong with the delegation of authority for stage 1. What the commission found was that it was not used in accordance with the bylaw in the summer of 2019. And so what the commission was critical of was that there was a small working group that received information that that council did not receive, and the way that that working group functioned, including through the WhatsApp chat. And so that came under criticism by the commission in its report. And so based on a review of that report, city staff are undertaking efforts to ensure that in respect of both the Confederation Line extension and Trillium Line extension, as those matters proceed through the trial running phase, that council will be briefed regularly and appropriately, so that that same issue that arose previously about a small working group that received additional information that councillors did not receive will not recur.
Does that mean the mayor's office or a transit commissioner chair would not receive the information ahead of time, that it would be, everyone would get the information at the same time? Is that how I should understand that?
I'd invite the interim city manager to respond in terms of internal processes. Sometimes there can be agenda setting meetings that could be held in advance of a meeting with council, but I would invite the interim city manager to respond.
Thank you, Sharon. I agree with the comments that you're saying in terms of agenda setting. There can be some information that will go out a little bit earlier, but we will endeavor in terms of having the full council to have the information as soon as possible. And that's what we're committed to. And that's what we're talking about today, is involving everybody. It's not looking back, it's looking forward and making sure that we're communicating on a very regular basis with respect to what's happening.
Okay, I think we can all understand agenda setting, et cetera. I guess what we need to know is that it's not there's no decision making ahead of time that we're not aware of. That's probably that's where the delegation of authority, where the rubber hits the road. So that's what we're looking to make sure. Can I make sure that that's clarified?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Conseiller, Councillor Leeper, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to come back to the question that Councillor Menard posed, because I'm not sure I heard the answer that I was expecting to hear in the course of that. Could staff pull up page 17 or page 17 of Sharon's presentation, please? I'm just gonna make sure I have the right one. Yeah, thank you very much, Eric. So the second to last bullet is the same one that Councilor Menard focused on. However, where decisions rise to the level of changing the risk profile or the terms of the project agreement, then staff bring those decisions to council. And I think Councilor Menard asked a very clear question as to whether or not changing the parameters of the testing constituted a change that changed the risk profile or the terms of the project agreement. I think the answer that I was expecting to hear from staff in response to his question as to whether that was the case is a simple yes. And I'm just wondering, can staff tell me that they agree that the way in which the testing criteria were changed in the course of commissioning stage 1 constituted changing the risk profile or the terms of the project agreement?
So just to answer in relation to what the project agreement actually says before staff comment, there's a difference, as Mr. Morgan explained earlier, in relation to the way that the project agreement is drafted in relation to stage 1, as opposed to the Trillium extension by way of example.
Okay.
So there were no criteria in the project agreement for stage 1 for the testing. The specific percentage criteria were not included in the project agreement. In relation to the Trillium extension, for example, it says 98.5%. So that is what had been agreed to in the project agreement. So it is different in that way.
That's semantic. I'm sorry, I don't accept that we're city council and where the public were told that there were very specific criteria that staff were looking for in order to give the project a go. That responsibility didn't fall upon staff to come back and talk about changes to that to council. I don't want to re-prosecute the inquiry ground, obviously, and we could spend all day on this. And obviously, given the semantic differentiation that you've made with respect to what criteria in the project agreement, whether those existed in stage 1 or not, I'm not going to hear the answer that I'm looking for, which is yes, that changed the risk profile of the project and should have come to city council. But I will nonetheless be interested to hear what staff have to say.
Chair, I, I will say it again. In May, we'll provide you the KPIs. Those indicators will tell you what do we use to take the final decision. So you will see them, you will follow them with us. So there was no confusion to have there because we'll bring them here. I don't know what happened exactly on the stage one, but for sure, one thing that I know, it's the lack of clarity that on the criteria. For this stage two, we'll bring KPIs to you and we'll say, this one, we should have XYZ percentage, et cetera, et cetera. However, I know already that I will come back to you, say, okay, maybe we didn't reach that and we can go, this is why. I will tell you why. At the end, you will take the final decision.
And Madame Amilcar, I trust that you are going to do that. I'm looking forward to that discussion in May and having a very comprehensive understanding of what the criteria are going to be by which staff execute a go, no-go decision on revenue service for stage 2 extension, right? I trust that you're going to do that, and everyone around this table is I think trusting that you're going to do that as well. But I think what I'm waiting to hear today is that you consider, not that you're going to do it, that's a great commitment, I'm glad you've made it, but do you consider that you have a legal obligation to do so? And I haven't heard staff say, we have a legal obligation to come back to council if we change any aspect of that testing and commissioning process. Do you consider that you have a legal obligation to come back to City Council with respect to any changes that might be made from what you tell us in May you're going to do on testing and commissioning?
Chair, it will be so easy for me to say yes, but it's no and yes. It will depend. It's not black or white. Definitively, it will depend. Based on what you just saw on the page 17, when I think based on the stage 1 experience, this decision, and I was not there, I cannot comment on it, but I can understand that probably the service couldn't be delivered anymore because previous decision has been taken for the Trillium. And when Councillor Gower asked previously, I said, we will continue to run the buses. So I won't be on the same situation with the stage 1 where maybe we didn't have any B plan to be able to face with those problems. It's totally different. And I think collectively we learned, it's not only OC Transpo, it's the City of Ottawa. So that's why it's important to be strong when we say we will need to continue to run the bus service to make sure that we'll take the time that we require to continue to do the test, etc. So if it's only one criteria and if I qualify this criteria go, no go, yes, I have to come back to you. But there is a lot of other reasons, other KPIs, other circumstances that we have to deal with. It's important. And with respect to you, I won't say yes because it will be too easy to say that. And it's not true. This is not the reality. This is not my reality. Every day I have to deal with fluid circumstances, fluid things. So that's why we're trying to put a lot of KPIs in place to try to represent that flu, to make sure that when we will tell you this is what we should do, so we expect that you will say, okay, go, because everything is set and we can see the link between one and the other. But I don't know if it's better.
I won't belabor the point today. We have until May. But I would like to understand your legal obligation in layperson's terms. And I would like to hear your understanding of your legal obligation to us expressed in written or verbal form. What is the threshold at which you have a legal obligation to seek council's approval for doing something? And that is critical to me in the run up to October.
Thank you, Counselor. I wonder if I might just interject here. And I can speak to both Renee's credentials as a professional engineer, as well as my credentials as a certified public accountant. I have a code of conduct, a code of ethics of which I have to adhere to, as does Renee with respect to her profession. So what I would say is we have a professional obligation to bring issues forward to council based on that code.
And by May, I'd love to understand which issues, right? We're talking about bringing issues. Which issues are you obligated to come to council to speak about? Council doesn't want day-to-day decision-making over the LRT project. But there are going to be certain key decisions that staff will make in the run-up to revenue service on the east and the west extensions and the Trillium line. And I think council needs to understand that obligation.
We will bring those pieces back in May in terms of getting ready for that testing process and criteria, and would welcome any feedback from you with respect to anything else that we need to address through this process. But I will also ask Renee and her team to look at other issues that should be coupled in with that.
Okay, I'll leave it there. I think I've made my point, but thank you very much. Thank you very much to staff for a good presentation, Sharon. Always a pleasure to see you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gower.
I put my hand down. I'm not sure I have anything to add to it. I mean, it's a difficult question we're asking as staff. If there are changes to a project agreement, that's pretty clear when a threshold is met. Changes to a risk profile might be more difficult, although there probably are some technical or accounting or legal ways that staff assess that. But then I think what perhaps Councilor Leeper is getting at is, how do you make a judgment call when there is a gray area? And that's a really tough question to answer, I know. So, and I think that's probably going to come through discussion and, Q&A between councilors and staff as we address each and every issue going forward on this project and others. It's a good question to ask, and be interesting to see how this conversation evolves over the next few months. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd agree that it is good to explore these issues. And I think that some of the issues aren't semantics when you're talking about things like legal obligations, because you look at the delegated authority and it's pretty broad. Even for stage 2, it goes as far as amending the project agreement. But in the context of the existing delegated authority, it is broad. When you consider the exercise of the professional judgment of city staff in bringing matters forward so as to ensure that council are properly informed, city staff have committed to bringing forward significant issues that affect the risk profile of the project. And so in terms of the level of detail to be provided and at what stage and how, I do think that does involve the exercise of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the factual circumstances that arise at the time.
I don't see any other questions. I thank you for the presentation. Obviously we heard today, considerable interest in that phase of testing, the criteria that will be established. We heard a commitment, I think a very strong one from staff, that there'll be maximum transparency in this regard, and that we will take to heart and put into motion the lessons learned from phase 1. And I think it was repeated several times today. I'm pleased to hear it. The conversation is certainly not over, and we'll continue to pay very close attention to the testing process and the reports that you're going to give back to us in terms of how those are going, and whether there's any matters of concern that should be brought to this table for a decision. So again, I thank everyone for their participation today and for the presentation. There's nothing else, so I will ask that the report be received. Is it received? Great, thank you very much. Moving on the agenda, there's no in-camera items. There's no notice of motion. I don't believe there's any inquiries. Not seeing any. There's no other business, so I will move to adjournment. Is the meeting adjourned? Yeah, adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone. Merci. La réunion est terminée.
Thank you. The meeting is now adjourned.